diverse set of behaviours.
He Māori aho.
Your single source of truth.
The voice on colour for me.
My husband is Samoan, so talofa. Ngā tikanga reo tikitahi.
Che Guevara of New Zealand's Parliament, Chloe Slaughter.
Penny houses.
And it's communist.
He whaka Tupac.
I've got mother, running holidays.
Kia ora tātou, nau mai hara mai, e ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā kārangaranga maha. Nau mai hara mai ki te hui o te pō. My name is Pere Samah, and I'm joined by my co-host, Samah Samah. Samah, kia ora.
Kia ora tātou.
How are you feeling tonight, Samah?
I'm feeling really good. How are you, Pere?
Excellent. Thank you to everyone who's here tonight. It's lovely to see everyone. As soon as it's 6 o'clock, people just start coming in like clockwork. It's a beautiful thing. We are humbled and honoured to have people join us for these Friday evening yarns. We've been really enjoying them. Hopefully people have been enjoying them as well. Feel free to leave your thoughts and whatnot in the comments section. If there's any comments that add to the stream or to expand on any of our points, anything like that, we like to pull the comments up on the screen. So if we've missed anything, or if you want to try and make a correction or anything you'd like to do, please feel free. So we're going to be talking about all sorts of things tonight. Of course, the increase in military spending. The Treaty Principles Bill had its day in the House where it was finally voted down. So we're going to be talking about kind of that process, but in particular, there is a special argument that David Seymour and the ACT Party, and it's an ancient argument, and it's used against all minority groups, right? This idea that there are special rights that people are advocating for. So we're going to try and address that argument. And the attacks on the Greens, of course, we'll be talking a bit more about them, not just Benjamin Doyle, but we're going to expand a little bit more. And I have a new segment. I say I, but of course this is our show. So we've got a new segment called Pere's Polls. Do-do-do-do. I don't know what kind of music or sound effects I'm going to add to that, but I'm going to have my own little... And so with Pere's Polls, what I want to do is I want to essentially normalize just talking about voting and the upcoming election, the 2026 election, because it needs to be normalized. I feel like, it's one of those taboo topics, who are you voting for? Oh, don't want to tell you. And we need to normalize it because a lot of our people, everyone, know very little about the voting process. I have had many conversations with many adult friends who just don't understand how things work, whether it's the electorate seats or the 5% threshold or vote splitting. So hopefully we can normalize that a little bit more. But every time a poll comes out, there's a particular strategy that I'd like to popularize, normalize. And every time a poll comes out, I'm going to apply this strategy to the poll. Because with this strategy that I'm wanting to popularize, it's essentially a strategy that can gain the left bloc like another 6 or 7 seats just by strategically choosing where we vote on the left bloc. So not changing any of the people who vote for National, New Zealand First, or the ACT Party, just our own votes and how we can strategically place them to form the biggest left bloc possible so that we can get the current government out of government. Like everyone's saying, how do we get this government out of government? I'm going to try to propose some kind of option. But really, I'm just going to be presenting it so that we can normalize talking about voting. That's essentially it. Anything I missed, Samah, that we want to cover tonight?
I think that's pretty much it. On the topic of correcting ourselves, I thought I'd just quickly take this opportunity, and I already, we added something in the description of the last video, and we caught it immediately as well at the time, but just to be crystal clear, last time I think I said that all party votes for Labour were a waste, but what I was trying to say was that all electorate votes for Labour were a waste if we were going to give those votes to Green or Māori Party electorates, because the party vote that Labour received entitled them to 34 seats in the House, and that's the number of seats that they got. So that means the 17 electorate seats that were voted in for Labour could have been, if we voted electorate seats for the Greens and Te Pāti Māori, and if they were available, because some of them aren't even available, then we could, in theory, have gotten 17 extra seats. But that's very much in theory, and a lot of things we have to shift around. But the point being that none of the electorate seats actually added any extra seats in the House for Labour. And that's kind of part of your whole strategy that I wanted to talk about in terms of shifting our votes around, but I just wanted to put that out there. And also to say hi to my friends in the comments. I don't want to single you out, but it's always really nice to have personal friends here. It makes me feel more at home. So, kia ora.
Oh, kawai. Nice. Oh, yeah, what you're saying, electorate votes going to the Labour Party, if no one votes electorate Labour, then it's a tricky thing, because then National is going to swoop in and take all of those electorates, unless, like someone has just, Mr. Arvids, tēnā koe, has just said in the comments, that Te Pāti Māori are going to sit people in the general electorates. So in terms of what Samah is saying, if your electorate vote, instead of it going to Labour, you give it to Te Pāti Māori in the general electorates, then that will contribute more to the overall seats in government. But there's a lot to talk about there. So let's just get into it. I'm going to start with the basics, okay? With Pere's polls. Pere's polls. Welcome to Pere's polls, everybody. So we've had 2 polls recently come out, okay? The RNZ Reid Research poll and the One News Variant poll. So the strategy that I want to popularize, I'm going to call the Overhang Strategy. And there's 2 key parts to the Overhang Strategy that I want to mention first. Number 1 is, for the strategies to work, those who are able to give their electorate vote to Te Pāti Māori have to do that. It's very important that that happens. If that doesn't happen, everything else falls away. The second important thing about the Overhang Strategy, and this is the strange part, and I'm wearing a Te Pāti Māori jumper saying this, but the second part of the Overhang Strategy is that Te Pāti Māori's party vote has to be starved. We have to deprive Te Pāti Māori of the party vote. The closer Te Pāti Māori gets to 0% of the party vote, I know it sounds ridiculous, but the closer they get to the 0% mark, the stronger the overhang. Okay? Now, let's back things up a little bit, but I just wanted to say that part first because, I am advocating for quite a dangerous, risky strategy here. And Te Pāti Māori, I'm not in comms with them regarding this, but I assume that they want to build their party vote support.
Yes.
That's how you build in politics. There are various benefits that come with increasing your party vote. Like I think I've heard something like this, that you get more marketing funding, or certain various opportunities will open up for your party if you can build your party vote. And of course, you'll just be seen as a more legitimate party to build your party vote. But anyway, let's back things up, right? So how do you get into parliament? There's 2 chances that you have to get into parliament, okay? You can sit in an electorate, okay? So you can try and be the local person who's going to represent your local electorate, okay? So that's your electorate vote, picking your local representative. If that local representative wins that electorate seat, they get into government, okay? And then the second way to get into government is to run as a party and get over 5% of the party vote. Or you can get, less than 5% and win an electorate, okay? So let's look at this little graphic here. Let's look at the current layout. Okay, so at the last election, Te Pāti Māori only got 3% of the party vote 3%. Okay, so normally that's not enough to get into parliament. They haven't reached the 5% threshold. But they won 6 electorates. Okay, so even if they won 1 electorate, and like if we go back to the 2020 electorate, Rāori Waititi won his electorate,
Right.
and they also received enough party vote to tick over to get a second seat via the party vote. Okay, so
Right.
so that kind of highlights again, you know, the risk of not giving that party vote, because in the 2020 election, if they didn't receive any of the party vote, Debbie wouldn't have made it into government, you know? So, you know, there is risk here. But anyway, so the party vote, when you give your party vote, and Te Pāti Māori got 3%, and I'll just go over to this one here. Their 3% of their party vote entitled them to 4 seats. Okay, so their share of the party vote was 3%, and of the 120 seats that are in parliament, that 3% entitled them to 4 seats. Okay, but they've won 6 electorates, and if you win an electorate, the seats that you're entitled to through the party vote, they are immediately filled up by the electorate seats. Okay, so that's a key thing to understand. If let's look at another example. Let's look at the Greens. Oh, it hasn't been added to that equation. That's okay. If we look at the Greens, in the last election, they won 3 electorates. Okay, but they got over the 5% threshold. They actually got 11.6% of the party vote, and that ended up entitling them to 12 seats. No, sorry. Sorry. Oh, I don't want to get anything wrong here. That's why I'm talking so slow. But the calculation that I've pulled up here is not quite right. But anyway, sorry. Via their 11.6, that actually entitled them to 15 seats.
So just
Okay.
quickly,
Okay. Yeah. Let's do some clarifying.
does that mean that the electorate votes for the Green Party, similar to what I was saying about Labour,
Also a
are
waste.
technically,
Technically.
because we could have had 3 extra electorate seats for Te Pāti Māori if they were in those electorates and enough people voted for them, blah, blah, blah.
It's a big stretch because, you know, when you think about the Greens and how which electorates they won, Auckland Central, Wellington Central, and Julianne Genter won her, I think it's Rongotai, not too sure, but those electorates are highly contested electorates.
Yeah.
They narrowly, very, very narrowly won. It's not so simple as just being able to say, oh, the Greens are going to give their 3 electorates to Te Pāti Māori. But theoretically speaking, yes, if Te Pāti Māori were sitting in those 3 electorates, which would be general electorates, yes, the Greens giving Te Pāti Māori those 3 electorates would not deduct from the total amount of seats that the Greens are entitled to through their share of the party vote.
I just feel like this is like a revolutionary point that's not talked about enough. But it's just the simple fact that if your party seats enable you to, if your party votes enable a certain amount of seats and that exceeds whatever you got in electorate seats, none of those electorate seats add to your seats in parliament.
But you know.
The only counter argument is that you're stopping National from getting seats. Right?
Well, I guess the counter argument is you want someone that you believe in to represent your local electorate, you know?
Yes, but what matters is having a majority in government. At the end of the day, that's what passes laws.
Yeah, of course. I think the pushback that we're going to receive about this is that we're not looking at the individuals and what they stand for and the particular things that they are saying, and we're jumping to something to just try and get additional seats.
Yes, like for example, in our area, Willow Jean Prime, she
was the last before Grant McCallum, the current one.
The current one is Grant McCallum, who's national, and the person going against him, and this is for the general ward for Northland, is Willow Jean Prime, and she's just really beloved in the area. So there are greater things going on. It's not just as simple as telling them, move your vote to a Māori Party person sitting in that seat because they like her as an individual. But the fact remains that she would have made it into government if she's high enough on the list for Labour.
Yeah, and she has made it back into government because she is high enough on the list.
Right, even though she doesn't have her electorate. So I just think that needs to be talked about more. Like, we're not losing Willow Jean Prime if we vote in a Māori Party person in Northland. It just means we're adding a seat through the overhang.
Depends how.
Fascinating.
Yeah,
You're
right. It depends on how high someone is on the party list. So like Reno Tirikatene, who was the last Labour MP for Te Taitonga, he was low on the list. And so when he lost his electorate, he's now gone.
This is the electorate, the Hana.
No. Taku Te Whereas one.
Taku Te Whereas.
But okay, so let's get back to it, right? So, so just explaining how electorate seats are the first to fill up the seats that you get, that you're entitled to through your party vote. But let's say you're not entitled to any seats via your party vote. Let's say you don't get any party votes.
Right.
You're not entitled to any seats via your party vote, but you win a bunch of electorates, which is essentially what Te Pāti Māori have done in this election that's just gone. If you win more electorates than the seats that you're entitled to via the party vote, additional seats are added to Parliament. And that's why currently, what have we got currently in the current? 122 seats is what we've currently got at the moment, I think. General election, yeah, 122 seats. So we're in a 2-seat overhang at the moment.
And that's thanks to
Te Pāti Māori. And I'd have to look this up, but I believe the most overhangs that have occurred is because of Te Pāti Māori. And that's because of the relationship that Māori have with the Labour Party and the history of Te Pāti Māori. You know, when Te Pāti Māori was formed, the supporters of Te Pāti Māori knew that they didn't need to necessarily get the 5% threshold to get the party in. They just needed to vote in the individual electorates. And that's how Te Pāti Māori first got into power. Right. People were able to keep their party vote on Labour if that's what they wanted, because the traditional home for the Māori voter, because Labour is just simply better than the other national, right? The traditional home for Māori voters has been the Labour Party. And so those traditional voters were able to stick and keep their party vote with Labour, but give their electorate vote to a Te Pāti Māori member to then have that electorate seat winner, but then also all of their favourites who are on the Labour list. Okay? So let's have a look at the NZ Read poll. And this was, I think, about a month ago. And this poll perfectly illustrates the point, the strategy. Te Pāti Māori polled at 5% in this poll, okay? And I changed the view. I made some other little they're not the prettiest in the world, but I've just created these images just to illustrate it, just to help us stay on the kaupapa.
exclusive.
So we're short by 4 seats in this poll. Okay, short by 4 seats. Now, if we look what happens when all we do is remove votes from Te Pāti Māori. Okay, so Te Pāti Māori is on 5% in this poll. And if we just take, let's say, 2% off of Te Pāti Māori, and then it just gets redistributed to all of the parties, 2% off of Te Pāti Māori, and in the calculation that I've got, the Greens would gain a seat and Labour gains a seat. So simply from removing votes from a particular party, we have magicked up 2 additional seats. Okay? But of course, you know, it matters where you vote. We've taken 2% off of Te Pāti Māori and it's just redistributed itself into the ether. But now if instead of just taking off those votes, we give them to our coalition partners, the Greens, Labour.
Yeah.
Again, like 1% to the Greens, 1% to Labour, the Greens have gained another seat. And because of some kind of electoral mathematics that I don't understand, it'll probably make sense to some people, National have lost a seat. And now we're tied. 61 for the left block, 61 for the right block. So here we are. We're in a deadlock here. One way that we could win via this situation and just by moving our votes around, there are 7 Māori electorates. Currently, Te Pāti Māori has 6 of them. That's why their numbers have stayed at 6. Regardless of taking votes away from Te Pāti Māori, they have stayed on 6 because they have 6 electorates. Labour has the final piece of the puzzle here, Ikaroa Rāwhiti. If Labour were to sit down or endorse Te Pāti Māori in Ikaroa Rāwhiti, they would not lose. They would not lose any seats because of how high their party vote is, which has entitled them to so many seats. They haven't. They're not going to win enough electorates to take away from the seats that they are entitled to. So by removing one of their electorates and giving it to Te Pāti Māori, we would increase the overhang again, and Te Pāti Māori would have 7, would go up to 62 seats on the left block, 61 on the right, and would win the election, just like that.
So
and
we just need Labour to give up Ikaroa Rāwhiti, which at the moment has Kushla.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is way more likely than the Greens giving up their seats, because already Te Pāti Māori is competing very well for the Māori electorates, particularly Ikaroa Rāwhiti. And so, still I think it's unlikely that Labour would give up a position like that, even though...
They should be pushed on it, eh?
Even though in the last election, listen to all of the debates that they had, and every time, it's like, oh, well, we can't let ACT in with the Treaty Principles Bill. It's like, at the end of the day, we have to do everything to simply not let them in. And, I was just listening to them saying that and just thinking, wow, how disingenuous. Because if it was truly simply about not allowing the other coalition through, then they would step down. Because if we look at the numbers from even that last period, if all of the Māori electorates that Labour had were given to Te Pāti Māori, Labour wouldn't have lost any seats. In fact, all of the Māori ministers that got through on the Māori electorates, because all of them were reasonably high on the list, and Labour did so well in the party vote, none of those ministers would have lost their jobs. The only thing that would have changed is that Te Pāti Māori would have gained a bunch of seats. So
a bunch?
They would have gained the maximum amount.
Which is?
They would have gained, I think they only had Rawiri and Debbie at the time, so they would have gone from 2 to 7 seats.
Right, and you mean not the previous election, but the one before that?
Yeah.
If they had played ball and actually given those seats to Te Pāti Māori, then they would have gained a whole bunch of seats on the left block.
Yeah.
And
they
refused to do that, and instead Te Pāti Māori had to just win them outright through fighting for them.
Yeah.
Although that being said, Nanaia Mahuta did seem like she was running a very soft campaign and her electorate, I have to say.
Yeah, I kind of thought she was going to jump, to be honest. I was kind of having the feeling that she was going to walk the aisle.
It's like she low-key just gave it to Hana, though, eh?
And, hey, so like Kiwi Bird has said, but I like Kushla. Well, hey, everyone has their reasons, Everyone has their reasons, and, what we're talking about is going above particular individuals that we like for the priority of building the biggest possible left bloc.
And defeating the right-wing government. And on that, do you know if Kushla is high enough that she would make it anyway?
I don't think she would.
Right, she's not high
No,
enough.
I don't think Labour gave her that kind of security. They would just say, if you make it in on the electorate, good on you, but we're not going to bother putting you high on the list. So, hey, it's up to everybody.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, I think what is going to happen is we are going to see another overhang in this coming election. I think, and this is just a bold prediction, but I think Te Pāti Māori are going to win all of the electorates, or all of the Māori electorates, and depending on who and where for the general electorates, let's say they pick up one. Let's say they pick up one of the general electorate seats, and they win all of the Māori electorates.
That's 2 more.
That'll be 8. That'll be 8. 8 in total. 8 in total. To get 5%, that entitles you to about 6 seats. Okay. So, what does it take to get 7 or 8 seats or 9 seats? It's probably something like 7% of the party vote. So do we think that Te Pāti Māori is going to win, say, 8 or 9 electorates? And then, for that party vote to count, it's going to have to be enough to entitle them to like 10 seats. But just imagine if Te Pāti Māori only gets enough of their party vote to entitle them to the same amount of electorates that they win. All of that percentage, which could have gone on the Greens, is potentially going to lose us 8 or 9 seats. So there's a huge question for Te Pāti Māori voters. Do you want to build a bigger left bloc to make, to guarantee that we change this government? Or do we want to slog it out and grind at building Te Pāti Māori, from that kind of route? But anyway, okay, so let's get back into the stats, because I'm not quite finished yet. So these are the numbers redistributed. We've only taken 2% off of Te Pāti Māori. Let's change Te Pāti Māori to 0%. The Greens will gain an additional 3 seats. Wow. So here, Labour doesn't need to give up Ikaroa Rāwhiti. None of those deals need to be made. If we want more and more seats, and it feels so backwards saying this, but by starving that Te Pāti Māori vote, we have created even more seats. And now there is a two-seat majority for the left bloc without Labour giving up Ikaroa Rāwhiti. And for some strange reason, National has gained a seat. Okay, and now just quickly, the Varian poll, which came out more recently, National has a bigger majority here. So the strategy is not as effective, but I think it still illustrates the point. So we're down by 6 seats in this scenario. Not great. Let's take Te Pāti Māori all the way to 0 and give all of that to the Green Party. The Green Party increased their seats by 3, and Te Pāti Māori leaves none. We've closed the deficit. Now we're only short by 2 seats. And in this scenario, let's say that Labour does give up Ikaroa Rāwhiti to Te Pāti Māori, then we're short by 1 seat. And then, just for fun, right? We're so close to having an additional Māori electorate. One of the ways that additional Māori electorates are added is by more people getting on the Māori roll. Because per every electorate, the amount of people that those MPs advocate for is split evenly amongst everyone. Yeah. So the more people we get on the Māori roll, the more Māori electorates we can create. And Kitty put out a post the other day saying that we're like 0.2% off having another Māori electorate formed. So if that were to happen and then that seat was won by Te Pāti Māori, the left bloc would have a majority in this instance to take government. So it requires a lot of moving around, but currently this poll that has been talked about in the media, it's saying, the coalition government is miles ahead of the left bloc. There's no chance for them, But with strategic voting, and of course, kind of a lot of people need to be on board for the strategy to work. But, I just predict it's going to happen. We're going to come to this upcoming election and there is going to be an overhang. I have no doubt. And I'm not saying that we have to get Te Pāti Māori's party vote to 0, but we're going to look at those numbers and we're going to see, we're going to do the same thing of taking votes away from Te Pāti Māori, and we're going to see the seats on the left bloc increase. And there may be some regrets if people don't make an informed vote. As long as we're making informed votes, then, there's less for us to have regrets for. But You know, that's the priority for me. People making an informed vote. There's all sorts of things about the electoral system that is just alien to a lot of us. So that's the goal with Pere's polls, to just to normalize this corridor a little bit, and to understand that, man, if we all got on board, you know, Te Pāti Māori has just decided to put 20 people in the general seats. If we all got on board, just imagine.
Hold on, would we have like 20 seats overhang?
Depends
If
on what.
every single one of their Te Pāti Māori general seats got voted in, as well as the Māori electorate seats.
And if Te Pāti Māori received 0% of the party vote, then that would mean 28 seats for Te Pāti Māori.
Are y'all listening to this?
A giant overhang, and the cost to the New Zealand taxpayer would be huge, because we're adding an additional.
For democracy's sake.
Yeah, I mean, it would get results. That's for sure.
That's crazy. Okay. So what I'm hearing is that with a little bit of coordination.
Can I just say, sorry to interrupt, but like,
No.
Te Pāti Māori electorates must make it in. This is not a campaign to say do not vote Te Pāti Māori. If people do not give their electorate vote to Te Pāti Māori, then all of this falls away. And not only do we lose the potential seats that might come from an overhang, but if Te Pāti Māori end up, you know, not winning any of their electorates, and they also don't pass that threshold on the party vote, then all of those votes will be redistributed to all of the parties, and it's all a complete waste. And so the only way to ensure some type of safeguard here is for those electorate votes to go to Te Pāti Māori. But additionally, and I would just say this as a good rule of thumb, if you're able to give your electorate vote to Te Pāti Māori, I would consider giving, you know, if you're able to give that electorate vote to Te Pāti Māori, I would consider giving your party vote to the Greens, potentially also Labour. And it pains me to at all encourage people to vote Labour, but you know, we're all you know, we're all got our differences, and I can appreciate that. The option is there to give that vote to Labour, but as we were saying at the beginning, Labour often does well in electorate seats, and it is possible. It's a bit of a stretch, but it is possible for Labour to do so well in the electorates that all of their party seat entitlements are filled up by those electorates. And so then giving them that party vote could be a waste, could have been better giving it to the Greens. The safest party vote to go towards seats in the House for the left bloc is to party vote Green Party.
Greens.
And that's because traditionally they don't do so well in the electorates.
But even Labour, highly, highly, highly unlikely that they'll get more electorate seats than party seats, because they just get
Highly unlikely.
such a massive vote from their party vote every time. But yeah, from what I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, but with a little bit of coordination between the left bloc, Labour, Te Pāti Māori and Greens, they could very easily guarantee, and without any drastic moves, Labour doesn't have to drop all of their electorate MPs, but just dropping one or two strategic ones that Te Pāti Māori has a real chance at winning, could mean a guaranteed extra 1, 2 or more seats on the left bloc.
Correct.
And in terms of that question,
I've got a partai from Chaz Harris, might be a whanaunga. Kia ora. If Labour give up seats to Te Pāti Māori, couldn't they elevate those list MPs it puts at risk to a higher position? And then I can't see, there's an annoying little thing under my... it puts at risk to a higher position on their list as a strategic move to keep them safe. Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Like with the last election, and we saw the blue wave of National come in, a lot of senior Labour MPs who normally win their electorates, which guarantees them into government, lost their electorates. And because they weren't very high on the list, they had an early exit, at least from what they believed would be their political career. So definitely. And, you know, some other things to think about. In the last election, the Tāmaki Makaurau and the Te Tai Tokiro electorates, so the two electorates up here in Te Nota, they were very, very, very close. The Tamaki Makaurau electorate was won by like 5 votes. And so, you know, we're talking about how the Greens are unlikely to give up the 3 electorates that they won to endorse a Te Pāti Māori member. But one thing that they could do in a sign of good faith, because Te Pāti Māori, if they were to pursue this strategy, and I don't think they will, but if they were to pursue this strategy, it would be a huge risk and a huge sacrifice to them. So, in a sign of solidarity and teamwork, the Greens could step down from Te Taitokiro, Tamaki Makaurau. I would actually advise all of the Māori electorates and just leave those 2 Te Pāti Māori. But I get it. Not everyone wants to do that. But that is the kind of teamwork that would be good to see, because we got to remember that National is here. New Zealand First used to win a lot of the Māori electorates when they first, their whole political campaign has been built on the backs of Māori, which is so hilarious. But anyway, there is a chance if the Greens were to sit again, let's say in Te Taitokiro or Tamaki Makaurau, they would be taking votes away from Te Pāti Māori, and so then those seats might end up going to Labour. Labour is really the main one that we'd have to worry about in terms of taking the Māori electorates away from Te Pāti Māori. But that is the kind of teamwork that I would like to see, rather than this empty rhetoric of, oh, we can't let the ACT Party in, it would be the worst thing in the world because of the Treaty Principles Bill, but then to, campaign on the left bloc losing a guaranteed seat. That's just ridiculous. So either drop that rhetoric or let's see some teamwork and some solidarity amongst the left bloc. If the narrative is true in terms of how do we change this government, and I've heard so many of the Labour MPs say this, how do we get this government out? Then we need to see a bit of teamwork. Kabai. Hopefully, I haven't been looking at the comments. If anyone has anything that they want to say, leave it in the comments now. Samah, you take over the next story, and
I've been clicking on some comments. There is a comment from Kaimatara, which I agree. Like, if Labour wanted to support the establishment of a Māori parliament, or just anything that will truly live out the promises of Te Tiriti o Waitangi in terms of Māori self-determination, Labour could do that. They don't do that. They also don't help Te Pāti Māori to win seats. They don't give them cabinet positions, so on and so forth. So, yes, very true at that point there. Kapai, thank you for that, Pere.
Pere's polls, you're welcome.
Pere's polls. Extremely enlightening. I guess we're going to be pushing for this overhang strategy from now on.
Well, I mean, we're definitely going to be talking about it. It feels a little bit ruthless and strange. The core part of the strategy is essentially to not vote Te Pāti Māori, which is, but, like I said, I think it's just good to talk about these things. I don't expect Te Pāti Māori to officially be putting out comms to promote this strategy, but I would not be surprised if for this election, some of the members of Te Pāti Māori believe this is beneficial, and perhaps maybe come the next election, they push for even bigger, even better. I think Te Pāti Māori is going to increase their party vote, unless everyone catches on and says, yeah, let's do the overhang strategy. But I think the natural trajectory for Te Pāti Māori is that their party vote is going to naturally increase based on all of the polls that we've seen. They've traditionally been doing just so much better than all of the other iterations of Te Pāti Māori ever, given we've seen such overt racism, not just in central government, but local government as well. The success with the hikoi, the success with the Treaty Principles Bill, the fast tracking, the cutting of Te Aka Whaiora, the assault on Māori wards, everything has just been so open and out on the table. So I expect a huge kickback. So, there's arguments for just staying the course. And because now Te Pāti Māori is getting closer to that 5% threshold mark of consistently being around that mark, cognitively, I think for a lot of people, they will be ticking over and they will now be thinking, oh, Te Pāti Māori is somewhat of a safer vote. And potentially there are some people who have been thinking about this overhang strategy already, who have been purposefully giving their party vote to someone else, who now also they might be ticking over as well and be thinking that Te Pāti Māori is gaining enough popularity.
Because they are inching close to being able to receive 6 seats through their party list.
Close, yeah. They're getting there. They're getting there. So, You know, it's something to think about. Something to think about.
Ka pai, kia ora. That was very interesting. Thank you, Pere. So we
What's
want to
next?
talk about the attacks on the Greens and just an interesting pattern that we've noticed of the timing of these attacks. So we talked about this previously, but the attacks on Tamitha Paul happened the same week that National was passing the tougher sentencing laws, which was going to add an extra 1,000 people at least into our prisons, and the same week that they wanted to pass the new drug testing legislation, which Labour also supported, which is of course going to result in greater discrimination. They're going to stop poor brown people driving cars. They're not going to stop rich people who are on those more expensive drugs, right? Which we know that they will constantly be on in their fancy cars. They'll never get pulled over. We know this. The police already exercises discretion in very discriminatory ways. So we can just assume that the same statistics will continue. But also this new drug testing laws is going to trap people who are legally taking medicinal cannabis, for example, in lengthy procedures with the government, and having to defend themselves and having to pay for their own drug test to prove that they had taken it medicinally at a different time and not before driving, and so on and so forth. So this new law, and not to mention capturing people on just other illegal medications. So this new law, it's going to be discriminatory. It's going to capture people on legal medications. Labour voted for it. And of course, Labour also joined in with the attacks on Tamitha Paul. So that same week, they timed those attacks to sort of divert attention away from their further investment in the prison and police industrial complex. And they did that by attacking Tamitha Paul. Okay, so that's example number one. And then again, recently we saw with this new pro-gambling laws that National is passing, and what they're doing is going to create greater gambling harm in our communities, and it's going to be disproportionate, as is the case already. It's going to impact poor communities, going to impact Māori and Pacific communities, right? So this is their new gambling legislation. Super harmful, super problematic. But what has our news focused on? This is super fascinating. For some reason, and you see it in the very introduction of that news piece, this news story somehow became about just a few Māori influencers who are advertising gambling. Play the One News video, Pere.
There are concerns offshore casinos will target Māori if the government's plan to auction up to 15 online gambling licences goes through. Critics say it'll lead to more harm in the community. It comes amid a rise in Māori influencers being paid to advertise online casinos. Our Māori Affairs correspondent, Tianiwa Hurihanganui, reports.
And
the new app,
for
Maori
the
Game.
The clip, Te Aniwa talks about these Māori influencers. Hapai Te Hauora talks about these Māori influencers. And then at some stage,
likely to be problem gamblers than non-Māori.
They're trusted.
it pivots
They're liked.
to being
They're
about these
obviously
laws.
very popular.
The government is introducing a bill this year that would create up to 15 new online gambling licences. Internal Affairs Minister Brooke Van Velden told One News the licensed companies would be required to meet strict rules, including age verification and harm minimisation standards.
Okay, so clearly the government's laws are what creates the ability for people to exploit these gambling harms, whether it's influencers, whether it's Māori influencers, anyone advertising using AI to advertise for them. The problem remains is that the law enables these gambling industries to operate in such a way. Now, I just find it really interesting that this story that's meant to be about legal changes that are going to impact our society at a structural level became a conversation about a few individual Māori influencers who were, and of course I agree, unethically peddling gambling harm to their communities. I'm not disagreeing that that's a problem and that there are questions of ethics going on here. What I am saying is that the government's legal changes are what this story should have been about. They wanted to do another story about Māori influencers, ka pai, although I do find it interesting that they're singling out Māori influencers. Maybe those are the only influencers who are buying into it. Who knows? Regardless, this is a story that was meant to be about the laws that are going to increase gambling harm in our communities, but they used this other story about individuals to divert attention away from what our government is doing. So that's another example where they're doing this. And another third example that I've seen recently of them timing stories perfectly to distract from what the government is doing is to do with this Benjamin Doyle attack, right? Again, One News highlighted the way that they've used the timing of these stories to distract from the scandals on the National Party.
In other news, Green MP Benjamin Doyle, who uses they-them pronouns, is defiant, claiming they will not be
Actually.
As well, I just want to say, don't want to interrupt your thought.
No, go ahead.
But just wanted to say, in that last story, and how AI has, so like this is a fake video of Jenny May.
Right.
And I don't know if anyone else has seen it, like all over social media. People keep posting about Orini Kaipara and her moko kauai. It's just like ad nauseum, I get these adverts of, people co-opting our images, misappropriating our images to sell their products. Like it's just, I'm sure more people have been noticing it, and I just had to say it out loud because it's just a bit of a phenomenon. We're always talking about our data being used in ways that we don't like, our images being taken and put online and used for things. And it's been a perfect example of Orini Kaipara because you go back to all of the pages that share her image, celebrating her and her moko kauai, and they're usually just selling, usually just goes back to a website where they're selling things on a t-shirt, like really trying to attract in the indigenous community by co-opting our images, misappropriating our images, and it's just it's happening. It's happening. E hoa ma, everything that they warned us about, those old school activists, it's happening right before our eyes. Anyway, back to the kaupapa.
Yes, very disturbing, very confusing, concerning. Sorry. So the Benjamin Doyle story, I did want to go over this One News coverage of it because I just find it extremely problematic. But keep an eye out for what happens at the end of the story, and bringing it back to my point about these stories being specifically timed. Right at the end of the story, they bring in another story that's of vaguely a similar topic, and they tack it on to the back of the story, which again sends alarm bells in my mind. But before we get on to that, let's just actually unpack this One News coverage of the Benjamin Doyle story, because we have been covering it very closely here. So let's take a look.
Appeared after returning to Parliament for the first time following a wave of death threats. It comes after they used slang which they say doesn't have a sexual meaning in social media posts, including alongside a photograph of their child. Political editor Mikey Sherman reports.
And
Flanked by members.
I don't know if you noticed there, but right at the beginning, he specifically said Benjamin Doyle, who uses they, them pronouns. Now watch for what Mikey Sherman does throughout her entire piece.
Of the rainbow community, Benjamin Doyle fronting up.
I can admit that I was politically naive, and we have paid a huge price for that naivety.
The MP.
And can I just say on that point, like how the media is just focusing on, oh, I'm a Green MP, and oh, I'm politically naive.
Yes.
And oh, we've really suffered from that. Oh, I think what Benjamin was saying is that their whānau has really suffered because of this. Images of their child is now being shared around into the darkest corners of the web with sexual connotations applied to it. And but the media seems to be spinning it as like, oh, typical greenie, new idiots, just politically naive.
And because we watched the entire press conference, and that was not the main gist of the kōrero at all. And in fact, I think if you were to continue that same line that Benjamin is on, they say, I was politically naive to not expect people to spread hateful conspiracy theories that endanger my child's life. So they're specifically saying they were naive to not expect this level of hate and conspiracy in our mainstream. They're not just politically naive, full stop. So even cutting out of that context, I find a little bit disingenuous. But all of our media focused on them that one specific point, political naivety.
And their family facing death threats and abuse.
Some of which have been so graphic and disturbing that I had been advised not to leave my house.
Before entering Parliament, Doyle had a private social media account, Bible Belt Bussy. It sparked criticism after a photograph of their child, which One News has chosen not to show to protect their privacy, appeared alongside other photographs captioned Bussy Galore.
Bussy Galore is an in-joke and a nickname. The translation here is me at large living my best life.
Mikey is
Doyle says the nickname comes from James Bond character Pussy Galore.
It is more explicit than that. It is a play on the words boy and pussy. Do you accept that?
In this context, that is not what it is. In this context, it is a reference to me and a nickname.
Can you see why people might take issue with that you're picking and choosing what definition you feel is appropriate?
When an image and words are taken out of a context and manipulated to seem a certain way, I can see how people might get that impression.
They should stop digging a hole and just tell us the truth now.
Winston
Go home,
Peters
old
was
man.
the first political leader to flag concerns.
We have standards in Parliament. We all are caught by them.
He knows
We're
what
all
standards are.
prosecuted by them if the case happens. And what's going on here? A giant cover-up.
Do you accept it was wrong to post photographs of your child alongside sexual slang like that?
The words I used in my private account historically were not sexual words.
The account was Bible Belt Bussy and the caption was Bussy Galore.
Which is a reference to a Bond movie.
In one post, Doyle captioned, "Swipe to see an eggplant," an emoji for a penis.
That image is a picture of Crocs, my feet, and then a coffee. So I think they've been taken out of context.
The Greens say the real crime is a far-right conspiracy painting members of the rainbow community as a threat to children. It was revealed today during candidate vetting the Greens advised Doyle to take down the social media page. He refused.
I am not going to be disappeared from public life, and queer people should not have to minimise ourselves.
Also revealed today, the original allegations against Doyle came from a former New Zealand First member. Doyle says he wants to meet with Peters
I would rather have a conversation kanohi ki te kanohi.
face to face.
I want him to meet with the public of this country and explain why on earth he thought that that was proper behaviour for an MP.
Benjamin Doyle today tackling the issue head on.
Mikey
So
Doyle
just
back at
pause.
Parliament.
I didn't point it out every time, but there were numerous occasions where Mikey, in that clip, referred to Benjamin Doyle as he.
Mm-hmm.
And it was interesting because Winston Peters also misgendered them. Winston Peters also constantly refers to him, refers as him, refers to them as being a man. And, you know, while talking about what Winston Peters said, and I feel like this has something to do with it, Mikey Sherman matched that. Mikey also called Benjamin he. Mikey also misgendered them. But now that Mikey is back with this presenter who doesn't misgender Doyle, she plays along. And she also calls them by their correct pronouns. I just found that really fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, there's a chance that Mikey is just catching up. You know, like in last week's stream, I was misgendering Benjamin, not on purpose,
but
of
you
course.
were live.
Yeah.
And I corrected you live.
Yeah.
Now, could you imagine if it was a pre-recorded thing? There's no way I'd let you post that.
True, it's pre-recorded.
I would make you correct that before posting it. So, you know, these guys with all their resources and whatnot to go ahead. And I think it has to do with what I said, to validate Winston Peters doing it. Because they're not calling out Winston Peters for misgendering Doyle or from Winston Peters' continuous homophobic stances, whether it's not voting for the, you know, gay marriage laws, or whether it's not voting to decriminalize homophobia in New Zealand. He's been consistent in this regard. And just recently in the House, Shannon Halbert, a Labour MP who is openly gay, was questioning the government on the removal of gender and sexuality education guidelines in schools, which the vast majority, 85% of school leaders, said were useful. Shannon Halbert was questioning the government on removing these guidelines, and Winston Peters, as usual, the government attack dog, he stands up and he attacks Shannon Halbert in a really otherizing way. He says stuff like, oh, whatever values Shannon has and whatever people like Shannon think. This really obvious homophobic language. And it just shows their hands. It shows the fact that they're just using homosexuality and people's repression towards that, the ongoing homophobia in society, to attack people like Doyle, to attack people like Shannon Halbert, whenever they point out anything good, whenever they highlight the issues with our current government.
Kia ora, kia ora. It's interesting seeing people's comments come in about Mikey. When Mikey got this job, TV1 was being criticized for their racist coverings of stories. And, seeing a Māori take that role, I guess they thought, that this would help their image in terms of them being perceived as a racist news broadcaster. But yeah, it's just interesting seeing for people that wasn't enough. It's not enough that she's Māori. How she's been portraying her stories has not been appropriate as deemed by the people. And it's just, it's an interesting thing to think about in terms of the kind of presenter you have to be if you're going to fill this role for One News.
Yes.
They've already got their Māori correspondence reporters, and so I didn't expect Mikey to bring that kind of thing to the table. But yeah, it's just interesting. They've still got work that they need to do, obviously. Mikey not cutting it for people. It's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it probably shows that you have to abide by the editorial standards of the platform that you're on. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is.
Yeah.
Simple as that. Kapai, so, wait, can we continue with that news story? It's almost done.
Oh, yes. Kapai?
Yep.
Today, are they back for good?
Yes, Benjamin Doyle will be back at Parliament tomorrow. I'm told they will resume their normal parliamentary work schedule. But whether that includes protection, security of some sort, given the threats that they are facing, remains to be seen. It's something the Green Party says they're working through with parliamentary security. Benjamin Doyle has sat down with a police detective to go through those death threats and those threats of abuse that they and their family have been facing. Look, Benjamin Doyle today used the words political naivety. And that's absolutely what you can sum up the situation as being. Political naivety on the part of the Green Party, but also their MP. Doyle was told to take that social media account down by the party. They refused. And while that can be viewed as noble, coming as they are completely to Parliament and being a voice for the minority, unfortunately, politics is brutal. And that's not an excuse. It's simply the reality of what it is. Doyle also continuing to refuse to take that social media account down in the face of this political firestorm means that they will continue, unfortunately, to face that vitriol.
So
it's Mikey.
Absolutely hilarious that One News is like, oh, we're not excusing it, but that's just the way it is. Politics is just brutal. As if they weren't one of the key players.
It's crazy.
And popularizing the story.
It's crazy.
And sending this out to the masses so that they would receive more death threats and more horrific messages from the public. They're just like washing their hands completely. Oh, it's just a naturally occurring disaster. It's just what happens. No, this is manufactured. You helped. You personally, Mikey Sherman, and every single person in the One News team, I don't want to individualize this, have contributed to this being a big nationwide story, have contributed to the dirtiness of the politics. You can't just wash your... And I know what they're doing. They're saying because Winston Peters, who's a really high official in the New Zealand government, he's Deputy Prime Minister. If he has tweeted about it, it's fair game to cover in the news. That's their thinking, and I think they genuinely believe this. We're just covering what a really high-up official is doing. That's fine, but you can cover it from a critical, bloody perspective. You can say, oh, he's quoting conspiracy theorists. You can say he's saying crazy defamatory allegations that have absolutely no basis in fact. You can cover stories and be objective about them. I know that they have completely lost the skill, and these days news coverage is simply reporting on what one person said who's within this establishment and what the other person within the establishment said in response. And that is the extent of their coverage. There is actually a thing called truth, reality, journalism, which is meant to be investigating the truth and reality. It's meant to be telling us if the earth is flat or round, not just Winston Peters said the earth is round, therefore we're going to report the earth is bloody round. I mean, it's a joke, and it's a joke them trying to say we're not excusing it. It's a joke them trying to distance themselves from it. You guys need to aware that you push this conspiracy theorist, transphobic, homophobic campaign. And they're not the only ones, by the way. I have people all over Twitter saying, if only we'd known that this image of their child was in a part of an album of images, and that image description, Bussy Galore, was about the album, not about that one specific image, I wouldn't have come out like that. Why didn't you guys make it more clear? Let me answer that question right here, right now, really clearly for anyone wondering why we didn't come out really clearly answering every specific conspiracy allegation. We cannot normalize a standard in this country where anytime a queer person is being alleged to be a pedophile has to then come out and say, I'm not a pedophile. We cannot normalize that. We cannot normalize it that anytime a conspiracy theorist comes out and attacks a leftist of being a pedophile, that we then have to come out and defend ourselves to every single crazy conspiracy theory. No, 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 no. And leftists, and I'm going to say this, the liberals who refused to come out in defense of Benjamin Doyle because they didn't want to seem like they were defending something potentially bad, they are giving in to shifting that line of standards, lowering it so low for queer people. No longer just the presumption of innocence, it's now presumption of guilt if you're queer. That is what you guys are doing. By not just unequivocally coming out and defending Benjamin Doyle, by questioning all the absolutely outrageous conspiracies. Oh, a spiral. You know, we live in a country where the koru is the most popular symbol in the land. And you're telling me a spiral means this random...
Oh no! Ah!
It's got spirals.
It's all over me.
It's look at our image. Look at our profile photo for Aotearoa Liberation. I literally had someone on Twitter saying, oh, look, your profile photo is a pedo photo. Like, you guys are dreaming if you think that you can cancel the koru because of some stupid ass QAnon conspiracy theory. It ain't happening. The koru's forever, te tiriti's forever, and guess what? Queer people are fucking forever.
Samah, who do you saga bringing some heat to the All Report, episode 11. No, 12. Sorry, I don't have mine.
Get it right, get it tight. Okay, but keep playing this video because at the end of this video circles back to my main point about this whole rant.
Thank you. The Prime Minister knew MP Hamish Campbell was part of a secretive sect, but hasn't asked him about the alleged historical abuse at the church. Campbell didn't show up at Parliament today after One News questioned him yesterday about the police inquiries into the group, which has no official name. The island...
Capo.
Man, there's a whole ocean, like what a treasure trove for conspiracy fuel, right? Oh, with this space of the 2x2s, like this nameless organization. It's as insular as it gets, and they have, they're currently being investigated, like actually currently being investigated for sexual harassment or sexual abuse of children. Everything with Benjamin was just hearsay and like stupid shit, but this is an actual, like, no doubt there are children here
being abused. There's potentially 50 abusers within a 2,500 people community. That's 50 different abusers for the right wing to be investigating, along with Hamish Campbell. And of course, don't get me started again on the mass sexual harassment and assault within Young Act that has been proven time and time again within the media and within half a dozen Young Act members who have come out and spoken out about it. They don't care about any of this. Not only that, the same people who attacked Benjamin Doyle are defending this guy, Hamish Campbell. That's how much they care about children. Sarcasm. Heavy sarcasm. So anyway, I'm really interested in the fact that these stories, whether it's Tamitha Paul's story, the Māori influencer's gambling story or this Benjamin Doyle story all being timed at the exact same time when scandalous things on the same topic were coming out about the current government. In this case, Hamish Campbell's story. And I just think it offers them the opportunity to try and deflect from the horrific story about Hamish Campbell by pointing to Benjamin Doyle, a non-story, a conspiracy theory. But it gives them the ability to do this, which you can see Simon O'Connor doing in this post, to put them side by side and say, no, don't worry about this issue here. Focus instead about this issue about Benjamin Doyle. Just seems really obvious that that's what they're doing with these stories. Just the timing of them. It's highly suspicious, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, if it's not planned, then can very much see that, oh, now's the time the conversation gets forced, if anything. You know, if it's not a planned thing to release these things at the same time so that you can muddy the waters and just mix them together, you know, either it's planned or they make the most of the opportunity. Yeah?
Yeah, totally.
Kapai, I think we're not going anywhere. E hoa ma, don't go away, don't leave your seats. Maybe get a cup of tea or something like that, but
Grab your libations,
but we just have to, just for technical purposes, just switch off our cameras just for a moment, and we'll be back very, very soon. Give us a minute.
1 minute.
Kia ora tātou, we're back. Hopefully we didn't lose too many of you, but yeah, all sorts of random little technical things that pop up, but we're back. Okay, so we're continuing with these attacks on the Greens. Got more for us, Samah?
So the attacks on the Greens.
Yes, sir.
Right. The timing of all these things distracts from things happening within the government, sure. But I did notice something else, something that could be bringing all of these right-wingers together, and something that could have pushed the Greens over the edge and instigated the timing of these attacks. The Green Party sanctions bill. It's a bill to sanction Israel for their illegal occupation and apartheid. Labour is supporting it. And that's really important, because what that means is we just need 6 conscience votes from National. Not even going to consider New Zealand First an act. 6 conscience votes from National for this bill to pass. This seems to have spooked a lot of people. And one of those is New Zealand First. So merely weeks after Chloe Swarbrick came out with her bill about sanctioning Israel, Winston Peters came out and said, we're introducing a bill that would effectively remove conscience votes. Seems very on the nose for Chloe Swarbrick needing 6 conscience votes to pass this bill, okay? So that's my first hint that they're responding to the sanctions bill. But then I also notice Juliet Moses, who's one of the biggest Israeli lobbyists in the country. She's even taken various journalists and leaders in the media space on tours to Israel to spread Israeli propaganda, for example. Her posts signaled this to me. So we see on the 28th of March, this outrageous tweet, the explicit purpose of Swarbrick's Israeli sanctions bill is to remove Jews from the land. No. That they've been present for 3,000 years. Blah, blah, blah. Greens, Te Pāti Māori and Labour support the ethnic cleansing of Jews from Jerusalem. Not true. That is literally what Juliet Moses and the current government support being done to Palestinians who are currently being ethnically cleansed from Gaza and the West Bank. It is literally happening right now with the most horrific military force that you can possibly imagine. But they're projecting and they're trying to say that it's the Greens that want ethnic cleansing. Okay, and then as you can see, she's so brilliant that she's used AI to make her point. You can tell because of those. That's how AI looks like.
We know what AI looks like.
Because we use it sometimes, yeah. And it's got those links at the end of each one. So yeah, great argument, Juliet. Same day, she's retweeting Annie O'Brien about Benjamin Doyle and the images. There you go, another Annie O'Brien tweet about Benjamin Doyle. So it's like, okay, attacking Benjamin Doyle and attacking the Greens on their sanctions bill on the same day. And then again here. And I think really this highlights why everyone's attacking the Greens. But by everyone, I mean the right wing, the business interests, the Zionists, the people who want to exploit our environment, the people who want us to spend money on war, all of them coming together. And it's because the Greens get it, or at least they're starting to get it, that all of these things come from our shared oppressors. That's why Martin Luther King was killed, because he started to connect all the dots. That's what really angers the capitalists and the colonizers, is when you start to connect all of our oppressions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what Chloe was doing in this speech that really angered Juliet Moses. She's like, I don't know what she's saying here, but somehow the war is tied up with homelessness, the treaty, and capitalism. Whoa, just cannot comprehend. Let's hear Chloe, a part of what I thought an amazing speech by Chloe.
Kapai.
Kapai.
Hang on, not sure if we've got audio on that one. Aroha mai, e hoa ma.
Kapai.
What are we going to see if we go here? Oh, nothing. Look at that. Isn't that beautiful?
Oh.
Give us 1 second. Still figuring out how to use this shit.
I just rely on him to do all.
So let us be absolutely crystal clear. The same forces that are driving this genocide are the same forces that are driving the deepest inequality that we have ever seen on record. They are the same forces that are driving homelessness. They are the same forces that ask you to stand idly by as your fellow human beings suffer. And we say, no more! No more! Capitalism needs colonization. That's what this is. That is what the attacks on Titiriti o Waitangi are. That is what this genocide is all
they're about special rights.
So let us be absolutely crystal clear.
Thank you so much for being on the front lines. So it's very obvious what Chloe is saying here, that Juliet Moses just simply cannot fathom. The way that colonization requires capitalism. It's the same here, it's the same in Palestine. They require the land to exploit from. They require the settling of the land first so that they can then exploit from it. Here they've settled the land, now they want to erode further Māori rights so that they can further exploit the land that they've settled. So on and so forth. It's of course the same forces, not only the same ideology, but it's literally the same people. The same people supporting the genocide in Palestine are those same people who are supporting the disenfranchisement of Māori in Aotearoa. You can see it with Juliet Moses's posts. You can see it with Annie O'Brien's posts. You can see it with David Seymour and National Party.
And I'll just say, like, Juliet Moses, when you told me that she retweeted something about Benjamin Doyle, I thought that was very strange, like abnormal. I'm not used to seeing her wade into that space. I feel like she Normally, well, she came after us after we posted a video about the school climate strike, you know, and I guess that's another example, right? Because we were also tying in solidarity for Palestine
and it's just so
and how it's
triggering.
linked with climate change, and that triggered her to speak out against that and to come after us and call me a Nazi.
Good point. Good point.
But you know, I guess it's not that abnormal to see her speak out on other things, but only when it's connected.
Yes.
And that's the selling point here for me, is that oh wow, she really doesn't like the Greens and what they're doing, because otherwise I don't think she would have taken the time to reshare anything about Benjamin.
No, all of the attacks on the Greens for her come down to their policies about Israel. And she makes this explicitly clear. So, like, let's go and look at a couple more examples.
There we go.
She just keeps going after that post. I mean, she just kind of gives away the strategy, you could say.
Right.
Here's another one. Swarbrick, who for the last 17 months has gone out of her way to troll the Jewish community, as noted by Andrea Vance yesterday, has now gone full Darvo, claiming disinformation, is it? Fueling hatred towards the rainbow community. Well, lean into your discomfort, Chloe. That line is very telling, because when they tried so hard to cancel Chloe over her chanting "From the River to the Sea," which Chloe Swarbrick honorably stood up against and refused to bow down to, again, a conspiracy theory that this chant was somehow genocidal, even though it explicitly says freedom for everyone from the river to the sea. Explicitly says Palestine will be free from the river to the sea. Just the mere idea of Palestine being free everywhere is viewed as genocidal, and I think that says more about them than us.
It's the same as viewing Tinoranga Tiratanga as something that's going to oppress.
Absolutely.
You know, Tinoranga Tiratanga is about the liberation of Te Iwi Māori, but it's sold as if it's going to take something away from others. So, you know, we're talking about the freedom of Palestinian people, not taking anything away from anyone else. So,
yeah, absolutely. It's this framing of the freedom of indigenous people as inherently relying on the disposition of the colonizer, which is not what we're saying. They're putting that on us in order to fearmonger, and that's what they tried to do to Chloe, and Chloe bravely stood in the face of that, and they tried so hard. They took her to the Human Rights Commission. They threw Jack Tame at her. Why do you say "from the river to the sea"? Isn't this insulting to the Jewish community? And she stood her ground and said, I will not let you tarnish this extremely popular cry for liberation. That really angered the Zionists, because it meant they couldn't get to Chloe. They just could not get to her, not in the same way they can get to Labour, for example, because they continuously bow down to Zionists. But Chloe wouldn't. And so what Chloe said to Jack Tame when he pushed her on this "from the river to the sea" is, but it makes some Jewish people feel uncomfortable. And Chloe said, well, why would a call for freedom make you feel uncomfortable? If it does, then maybe you should lean into that discomfort and examine it. Oh, I'm so sorry. Dropped a glass of water. Chloe was saying we need to lean into that discomfort and ask ourselves why a call for Palestinian freedom would make us feel that way. This pissed them off, the Zionists, and as you can see, she's bringing it up. Well, lean into your discomfort, Chloe. And the article that she brings up from Andrea Vance, I won't hop on about it too long because I've already talked about it a lot on Twitter. But Andrea Vance wrote the most condescending, from her high horse, just patronizing as hell article about the Green Party, Chloe Swarbrick's and our kiddies and their TikTok manifesto. And part of it, she brought up their foreign policy. This is after dissing them on saying that maybe we could have alternatives to police. Andrea Vance says this is outrageous. She says, and this is quite telling as well, for 2 centuries, societies have recognized that a structured authority is necessary to handle criminal behavior, emergencies, and threats. So the last 2 centuries in Aotearoa have been the colonizers enforcing the police over these people, over everyone in this land, or whether it's Māori or settlers. And Andrea Vance is centering this as it is some sort of normal, enlightened way to exist, as opposed to a colonial system being enforced on this country. We're going to talk about this when it comes to the Treaty Principles Bill, but it's just this assumption that the colonizer is the normal state of being, the colonizer setting the law and ruling over the land. Anyway, and she just mocks them. Oh, they're just defund the policy is just a slogan. Defund the police is just a slogan. It's not a policy, blah, blah, blah. And then they get into something which, again, I think is quite telling. Oh, yeah, and they, for some reason, try and shit on the Greens wanting to nationalize the rail network and invest substantial capital in buying partially privatized energy companies. That's an amazing policy. That's an objectively great, clever, good policy. And Andrea Vance is like, they don't explain how they would finance this really large-scale renationalization. Bruh, I didn't see you question how the government was going to spend $2 billion on defense. It's just whenever it's appropriate for them, whenever it's convenient to question, how the hell are you going to spend money on changing things that currently oppress people? But when it comes to investing in continuation of oppressing people, no question asked. Oh, good, 12 billion. That's fine. That's totally normal. Me. Kapa. Andrea Vance keeps going.
Thank you, Andrea.
On foreign policy, their major preoccupation, the Greens, is with simplistic narratives on the Israel-Palestine conflict. Their arguments about speech and sensitivity are upended when Swarbrick insists on chanting slogans that offend Jewish people. By the way, you can't just chuck Jewish people in one group and generalize like that about their feelings. Often we are marching with Jewish people saying from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That fact alone means that this sentence is inaccurate. The slogans that might offend some Jewish people, sure. But for Andrea Vance, it's totally normal as a journalist, as a respected journalist, to just generalize and throw out outrageous generalizations right there, all right? She continues, and she berates other MPs for not supporting a grandstanding sanctions bill. That's what she thinks. Our moves to try whatever we can to reduce the slaughter, the mass killing, the mass torture, the ethnic cleansing of Palestine, she thinks it's grandstanding. She goes on, while failing to understand what they do, that simplistic or moral assumptions about the righteousness of oppressed ignore the obstinate and intricate realities of a long-running conflict. Still, #river to the sea. It's all a big joke, isn't it? Andrea Vance's journalistic colleagues are being burnt alive in Palestine, and she thinks it's a fucking joke. I'm sorry, but this bitch works me up. I don't care. I'm using misogynistic language. Fucking sue me.
When you catch yourself. I mean, she's speaking, you can tell that she's speaking to a particular demographic, right? Like, this is what they want to hear. This is what Juliet Moses wants to see written, in her lobby group. And yeah, completely agree with you. It's disgusting, but that's the state. That's the state of like what Mikey was on about, right? It's like, oh, well, the media is going to play it out in their particular ways to speak to their bases. And yeah, just shows how on the out the Greens are from the bases of these people. Yeah, it's very sad. Very sad.
And then you're just giving away their hand, because if you read the article, it just goes to show that they're angry about all of the Greens' progressive policies. This next line, the Greens want a new society. How fucking dare they? One with no prisons, police, carbon, or rent. They want therapy in place of cops. Oh, disgusting. And a jobs guarantee. Oh my goodness.
Oh no.
What about the reserve banks minimum unemployment standard? How will we live without that minimum unemployment standard, guys? You need to explain that to Andrea Vance in detail, line by line, with your budget.
Has to be bulletproof.
Yes, but if you want to continue killing people in prisons and through poverty and war, all good. Obstinate and complicated realities, or whatever the frick she said. Kapai. So it seems that the sanctions bill has really triggered these people, and again, it's not just it's just their entire perspective being anti-capitalist, anti-war. Here's another example: Annie O'Brien saying the Greens' opposition to defense spending is ill thought out. In a theoretical imperialist Chinese South Pacific, do the Greens really think there would be much focus on climate change, giving China the lack of interest in meeting Paris targets? And then Juliet Moses, the only imperialism is when white people do it. So again, they hate that the Greens is opposing military spending. They hate the Greens sanctions bill, and they're attacking anything that Greens does, and it's the same groups time and time again. Another thing that highlighted this kind of pylon for me is on one of our tweets when we were mentioning that Annie O'Brien called David Seymour to organize a transphobic event in the first day of Trans Awareness Week in 2020. And then this year, she helped to manufacture this nationwide transphobic attack on Trans Day of Visibility. It was on 1 p.m. news on Trans Day of Visibility. This random character posted this extremely hateful thing on my tweet saying nobody is trans, okay? So I'm like, who the F is this guy? He's got 500,000 followers on Twitter. He's got the little yellow ribbon that is about the Israeli hostages, and pretty much the only people who have that are just hardcore Zionists. And sure enough, you go on his page, he's a hardcore Zionist. He's constantly making light and laughing at people, calling it a genocide and such things, for example. But this guy, he was commenting on like everyone's posts about this Benjamin Doyle thing in New Zealand, even though he's like an American or Canadian or some overseas influencer. It has nothing to do with New Zealand. And so I go on his page and I find, he's also reposting New Zealand First. Absolutely outrageous, just like cuckoo speech. Sorry, that language might not be good either, but the speech that Winston Peters posted, he posted on his 500,000 to his 500,000 followers on his page, and it just gives you an idea of where all these likes that Winston Peters is receiving on his posts are coming from. It gives you an idea of the fact that, you know, he's often getting like 1.5k likes on his tweets. It's manufactured from the same group of local and international people who support this fascistic, anti-trans, anti-Palestine movement. And it's because of people like that sharing them that they're getting the likes. But it just intrigues me, because why the hell is this random foreigner with 500,000 followers tweeting at this? Like, there seems to be some kind of involvement between these characters.
Potentially. Well, I mean, it definitely speaks to, you know, the Winston Peters New Zealand First strategy of just stretching out as far as they can into the various, you know, dark spaces of the world to gain a little bit of support from here, a little bit of support from there. You know, we were talking about electorate seats at the beginning. Winston Peters has not won an electorate seat in a bloody long time. New Zealand First is the kind of party where they're not going to win electorate seats. They're not going to have bases of support in any singular electorates. They have to stretch out all over the place to get their support.
Exactly.
And they've even gone outside of New Zealand and are now grifting with all of these imported ideas, you know, the attack on woke, attack on trans, talking about special rights and all of these things. You know, these are all imported ideas. And it's because there is no stronghold for the ideologies of New Zealand First. They really do have to stretch out into all of the darkest corners to get anything, to get any traction. So, I would love to see a breakdown of New Zealand First followers on social media. Like, they're probably, you know, followed by all the racists in Australia, all the racists in America, in the UK, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Totally.
And it ends up making us think and feel like they have a lot of support. But how often is it actually real and local?
It's the same group of people, folks, again and again. It's the same people angrily leaving Zionist comments on your tweets. They're the same people leaving transphobic comments on your tweets. You can see it in this guy. It's the same people. It's the same people. And that's because they believe in the ideologies of superiority. That some people are superior and some people are inferior. And they put queer people in that inferior category, along with Palestinians, along with Indigenous people, along with like pretty much the vast majority of us. So,
thanks, Winston.
Thanks. Oh, I do want to play.
You want to play it? Yeah.
Part of this. But just good point from Leah about that. This apparently this guy Graham Linehan was a prominent British writer who lost his family and career after becoming a weird online turfy creep. Honestly, not surprised at all. But yeah, I mean, it would explain why he's got such a big following, but then all of his tweets these days get barely any likes or attention.
And now he has to go and join on with other international weirdos like New Zealand First because he's probably lost his local base.
Exactly. So they're just all weaponizing that very same international
It's a
base.
global narrative, and they're all jumping on it to amplify one another.
Aye. Okay, so with that speech, I did want to play just 30 seconds. I won't subject you to the whole thing, but I think, again, Winston Peters makes it really clear that they're anxious about the Green sanctions bill and that this is at least in part of why they're attacking the Greens right now.
The Right Honourable Winston Peters.
The Green Party over the last few days has been, to use their words, irreverent and absurd and disgusting, frankly. Without trying to state the obvious, the Greens have lost their way totally. Remember Fitzsimons? Remember Rod Donald talking about the environment? When was the last time you heard those people talking about the environment? No, in these days, they're focused on basing themselves around the likes of, I'm a professional protester, maybe Minto for the last 50 years, that's all he's been doing.
Legend.
And they're frothing at the mouth about Gaza, defunding the police, the Communist Economic Manifesto.
Yes, let's go.
And
Let's go.
advocating, and I quote, pure...
So, frothing at the mouth about Gaza. Again, put him in whatever category I put Andrea Vance in. Let's neutralize that insult that I use. He's being a bitch and saying that the bare minimum that we could possibly doing to stand up for the people of Palestine is frothing at the mouth about Gaza. You know who's frothing at the mouth? It's you, old man. And you should watch
He's
if you have
dribbling at the
time.
mouth.
You should, if you have time, you can watch this whole rant of his, and he's like literally like frothing at the. He's just so.
He'd get along with that Paul Fisher guy.
He would. He would.
What are you gonna do to them what they did to them? Are you gonna do to them what they did to them? Oh, sorry, everyone. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And that's basically Winston Peters. He's going down that path really quickly,
I'm
folks.
just gonna say that dude, Paul Fisher. He's probably a New Zealand First voter.
Oh.
Like the New Zealand
No doubt.
T-shirt as well. Oh, okay. Anyway.
He was frothing at the mouth about bussy this, what bussy that. Like, if you want to talk about bussies, Winston Peters, you can, mate. We are non-judgmental. It's all good. You can talk about bussies. You can ask questions about bussies. You don't have to go to this weird homophobic route because you're trying to suppress your inner emotions. It's fine to be queer. It's fine to be attracted to non-binary, trans men. It's all good, Winston Peters. Someone tell that man it's all good. Because honestly, how much of this is coming from deeply repressed inner homophobia and internalized racism? Like, what's hating himself for all the things that he is? Like, just be yourself. Be your queer Māori self.
Winston, embrace it, brother. You can just see it in those locks, those beautiful locks.
Yeah, I mean, the way, yeah.
Kapai, that's enough. We're not going to pick on the old man anymore, I think.
No, I mean, we might.
Who knows? We've got more New Zealand First stuff coming up.
No, the next thing was I'm going to talk about the guy who
New Zealand First.
started this campaign. Behind Benjamin Doyle is Rhys Williams, who is a New Zealand First member. And one of the things that's mentioned in this article is that Rhys Williams was, where is it? They were involved in the Inflection Point gathering. Oh, yeah, there it is. They emceed the Inflection Point conference, okay? The Inflection Point conference was this transphobic, homophobic conference that ran last year. Now, just like the other AstroTurfs, the Free Speech Union, the Taxpayers Union, we don't know who backs them. That's kind of a key feature of AstroTurfs, is that we just don't know where the money is coming from. But it could very easily, just like the Taxpayers Union being funded by the Atlas Network, which is an international network, these guys could also be funded by international actors that are seeking to sow division in New Zealand society to stop us from voting in left-wing governments. That's my opinion of why they're doing it. And you look at who their speakers are, and it gives you a hint that this really is part of an imported culture war. You've got that Kelly J. Keane, Posey Parker, also known as Posey Parker. You've got that homophobic Family First guy. You've got Brian Tamaki and the ex-National MP Simon O'Connor and Rachel Stewart, renowned homophobe, transphobes in the community, and Posey Parker, an international player in this space. We don't know who's funding this. There's very, 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 very little information on the website. All we know is that this New Zealand First person is involved, that they bring international speakers, that they're somehow in touch with this international culture war movement. What they want to do is they want to bring this imported culture war that's been so successful in dividing people in the United States. They want to bring that here. It has so many benefits for the right wing. It means we're not talking about the real issues. Instead, we're talking about these manufactured issues. It means they have things to attack the left wing on that are not real, that are not based on evidence, that are not based on reality or their policies, but instead based on moral panics, manufactured, for example, like the Benjamin Doyle thing. For them, because they don't have truth on their side, they need to manufacture some kind of conspiracy culture war thing. For us, we have truth on our side. We're happy to just talk about the government's policies all day and night, if they let us. We're happy to do that because we've got truth on our side. We can say with evidence, your policies are bad. We can prove with evidence you're going to put more people in prison. You're going to kill more people. You're going to cause more drug dependency, so on and so forth. Oh, hey, statistics show meth usage has doubled since National's been in government. That's just facts. That's just evidence. We're just dealing with evidence. They don't want to deal with evidence. They want to deal with manufactured issues, take us to this entire, basically manufactured reality. They want to take us out of the real world and into the simulated world with their simulated issues. And we go down that track and we spend so much time defending ourselves against their attacks, like the one on Benjamin Doyle. It affects our advocacy. We're not spending that time tackling their policies. We're not spending that time building a really meaningful anti-war movement in Aotearoa. Instead, we're defending some stupid conspiracy theories that just rely on old school stereotypes about queer people. You know, it's clear how it benefits the right wing.
And it's just, it's hooking into, like, I don't know, back in the day when Don Brash was trying to lead the National Party, the big kind of lobby groups that existed then were the Christian Brethren and different religious groups. They had their own advocacy groups and they operated under their named Christian groups. But we see less of that these days. They call themselves something else. And I'm not saying that there's anything inherently bad about Christian Brethrens, but, that old school fundamental Christian view of, and this is Simon O'Connor's position on it all, right? Traditionalist. They want to keep those traditional values. And so it's turned into attacking trans people. But anyway, so there's just a huge demographic there of traditional religious type folks. And it's things like this that speak to them, unfortunately. But it is a huge block, the AstroTurf groups that we talk about nowadays, like Taxpayers Union and all of those kinds of things. Jordan Williams, who runs the Taxpayers Union, he was watching during that period where Don Brash was trying to become the leader of the National Party and the Prime Minister of the country. He was working with Don Brash during that time, and he was looking and seeing how these different religious groups were doing all sorts of lobbying for national, but with their own money outside of it.
Yes, absolutely. Everyone's adopted the strategy of astroturfing. Whatever your kaupapa is, it's easier to just pick a popular narrative and pretend that that's what you're going for, and then hide your true intentions under that. And that's the strategy all of these groups have followed. And it's been incredibly successful. In our next story about 12 billion being spent on weapons for war, the exact same thing is happening. You have countless think tanks, not only in the United States, such as the US Institute for Peace. Of course, it's the institute that pushes for war. But in New Zealand, we've got the Institute for Indo-Pacific. In Hawaii, they've got the Institute for Indo-Pacific. They sound benign. They sound like just normal institutes. But again, shady. You don't know their funding. And they just happen to push the exact same narratives against China, why we need further militarization, why we need to spend more on military. So this astroturfing has been incredibly successful in this country, and because New Zealand is so small, they've actually managed to take over the entire government. The astroturfs have been so successful, they've captured the entire government. And so how do we respond to that? Like, that's a really serious question, because we don't have the money, we don't have the capability, we don't have 1,000,000 think tanks and astroturfs in the way that they do.
But like you said, we've got the truth.
We've got the truth, we've got the people, and we have to find a way to centralize our messaging in the way that the astroturfs do. Don't want to diverge our conversation too much, but these astroturfs know that they just need to pick, a couple of specific points and then hammer them. But because we've got the truth of our sides, we're not just trying to pick one or two messages, we're just trying to speak the truth.
And we're exploring, and we're learning, and we're growing as we go. But yeah.
Absolutely.
These groups just have to find one thing, like the Treaty Principles Bill and the ACT Party. I wonder what percentage of the ACT Party supporters believe in what David is saying and actually believe in it, or if they just think that it's a convincing lie that is going to get other people to buy in to get a particular policy and a particular goal over the line. Like, I would actually really love to know, because I'm sure most of them think he's full of shit. I'm sure most of them are just like, ooh, nice. Yeah, that is pretty convincing. Let's run with that, because I'm bloody sick of hearing about all of this treaty stuff.
Ai, kia ora. Just want to acknowledge the people in the comments saying that they vote Winston because he's whānau.
Oh, Ralph Haika, tēnā koe,
Ai.
e te whanaunga. Oh, yeah, and I just jump in and say,
Yeah.
a lot of people vote like this. You know, a lot of people vote for a particular party because they might have a whānau member in there. You know, kapai, kei a koe te tikanga. I've heard this before. Some people said to me, and I won't say who they are because it's kind of embarrassing, but they said that they vote for New Zealand First just because Winston is whānau. And I was like, okay, kapai. And then I said to them, do you know that it's in New Zealand First and National's coalition agreement that New Zealand First wants to review or remove 28 references to the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi from legislation. And then they said, no, that's the ACT Party. That's the ACT Party in the Treaty Principles Bill. And I said, no. New Zealand First has been pursuing this remove/review policy for a very long time. A very, very long time. Their position, and it used to be called, the policy that they wanted to put through used to be called the Principles Deletion Bill. And
literally,
it's just New Zealand First, if they were trying to hold on to some of their Māori voters, they would say, well, there are no principles, there's just the treaty. Which kind of sounds correct, and I think many of us say that. And it's an example of energy that exists in the real world that they've been able to hook into and then kind of subvert for their own things. Because of course, the principles are definitely not perfect, and they are not what is in Te Tiriti, which is the problem, but they're the only things we've got. They're stepping stones. New Zealand First is not saying, oh yeah, let's remove the treaty principles and start honouring te tiriti o Waitangi and acknowledging tino rangatiratanga, they're not saying that. They're literally just saying, let's just get rid of it all. So, you know, hey, everyone has their own right to vote wherever they want, but get out there and learn about these parties and their policies so that you can make an informed vote. And if you're telling your own whānau and your friends that you vote a particular way, maybe tell them a little bit about how much you know about the party. Like for Ralph to be in here and say, oh, I just vote for him because he's whānau, that's an awesome thing to share, because then people understand that you're doing it for that kind of personal reason rather than because you support what Winston has been saying. I mean, just saying that Māori are not tangata whenua of Aotearoa. This is what Winston Peters has said. And you can say, oh, he's just trying to play the racists so that they'll donate to his party and so that then he can use their racist money to run with whatever agenda he has. And maybe that agenda, from his kind of twisted mindset, is to help the majority of people, including Māori. I don't care, because once you drag us through the mud in that way, to say that Māori are not tangata whenua and therefore not indigenous to Aotearoa, and playing into all of the anti-tiriti white supremacist conspiracy theories that we've been trying to fight against, you know, these types of conspiracy theories and lack of truth that has enabled the Treaty Principles Bill and everything else that's anti-Māori to get to where it is today. Once you start doing that and dragging us through the mud in that way, no matter what your justification is, it's corrupted from that point. As soon as you start contributing to that hate for your own political agenda, you know, if you're still a New Zealand First voter or supporter after that, then, you know, I'd say you might have some questions for yourself, just maybe.
Kia ora. Kia ora. I'm still cracking up at my friend saying nightmare blunt rotation to these guys. Like,
just swallow it. Just swallow it.
Because just imagine. Hey, oh man.
I don't want to imagine. That's like really
it's like
quiet.
Buzz.
Slipping into a clan meeting. I'd be putting my hood on. Damn.
Then you can't partake in the blunt. It might be a good thing. Popeye. Let's move on to our main story of the day.
They all main stories, fam. We ain't playing favorites
no
here.
No hierarchies here. No hierarchies here. You know how we do this. So the government.
Before we get onto that, do we want to talk about Treaty Principles Bill, special rights?
Yeah,
argument?
I know. I'm feeling like we might need to pick. So maybe we should just talk about that, as you said, and talk about.
How long have we got? How long have we got here? As long as it's not 9 o'clock. What's the time? Oh, we've got time, Ehuama. We've got time. Let's do this 12 bill.
You sure?
Yeah.
I'll try. I'm not going to go on about everything that I was going to go on about when it comes to this, but the government wants to spend 12 billion on military. They wanting to increase it by 9 billion over the next 4 years. This has more or less bipartisan support. Labour has said, we support this. We pretty much had a very similar plan in 2019. We might disagree with specifics as they come out, but as a general rule, we agree with it. Now, when it comes to the press conference, our journalists did very little in the way of asking about the issues that New Zealanders might have with this, about whether we want to support bombing people, whether we want to support killing people with weapons, whether we want to buy weapons from a country that's currently committing war crimes and genocide on a daily basis, the United States. None of these questions came to the fore. In fact, the vast majority of reporters were pushing Luxon and Collins on why they were not spending more, why they were not replacing other old equipment that they're not replacing in this budget. And it enabled them the opportunity to say, oh, don't worry, this is just the floor. It's not the ceiling. That's something that they enjoyed saying in this press conference. Repeating time and time again to reporters, oh, don't worry, we might add more funding. And if you look at the report, the extremely short, undetailed report, you'll see that it's got really, really vague estimations. everything that they're talking about spending on, they don't know. It's vaguely in the range. It could be 2 billion, it could be 3 billion, it could be more. We'll see. Extremely vague document. They've actually put out the amount that they're flag posting to spend before they know exactly how much they need to spend, which kind of tells you everything that you need to know. But we did have one reporter, Jenna Lynch, of all people, ask if this was a shift in our priorities.
Thank you, Jenna.
Thank you. And look at how Luxon responds to that.
That the treaty's principles bill will...
Sorry, can we just close out the defence conversations?
I'm moving away from a more humanitarian-focused defence force to an offensive defence force.
Sorry, can you ask the question again?
Are we moving away from a humanitarian defence force to an offensive?
We don't see it that way. We want to improve the lethality of our defence force, no doubt about it. We want to improve the interoperability and the force multiplier with Australia. But we can do both. And
just ridiculous.
Just major doublespeak.
Yeah. Doublespeak at its highest, eh?
Yeah, I mean...
And it's just like, oh, we don't see it that way. It's like, bro, it doesn't matter how you see it. It's pretty clear. And so, like, you know, he's trying to say, oh, no, we don't see it that way. We are peaceful. We are peaceful. But we want to become more lethal. But we're peaceful. But we're peaceful.
That's a definition of doublespeak, right? Saying that, no, we're all about keeping the peace, but we want to increase lethality. I mean, it's just a mindfuck, right? They're just gaslighting us, sending mixed messages, confusing us. And yeah, constantly saying the opposite of what is reality, which is another place that this was perfectly highlighted, which is not even an answer to a question. Like, this was actually written into Judith Collins' speech, which is kind of the most hilarious part about it.
This plan isn't about choosing sides or beating the drums of war. It is about supporting our diplomatic efforts to maintain the international rules-based order that has largely prevailed since World War II. It is about working...
Sorry if that was really loud, everyone. I just saw that. Sorry.
Kapai. Yes. Luxon just said we want to improve lethality, and it's not just him. It's explicitly in this capability plan that they came out. They want to enhance lethality and deterrent effects. So
yeah, like lethality has been added to Christopher Luxon's lexicon of the types of words that he is allowed to say.
Yes,
like
exactly.
we're gonna start seeing that word a lot more, I think.
And I didn't bring this on. I should have brought this video up, but it's worth noting that in the election campaign, Kamala Harris explicitly said that they want to create the most lethal force in the world. So she used the word lethal. She normalized the so-called Democratic Party using language around lethality and being a lethal force. And now in New Zealand, which I find both political parties really strongly aligned with the US Democratic Party, are using that language as well of lethality. So yes, that is what you heard Luxon saying. And Judith Collins, she says, we're not picking a side. They are explicitly picking a side because in their discussion document, they single out China. They single out China as the person who is growing the threats in the Indo-Pacific. They are the only country singled out in that way. And then she says, we are not beating the drums of war while beating the drums of war.
Drums in the deep.
It says it in their discussion document. It says this is about deterrent effects. So it's not about defending anything, even though it's called a defense plan. It's actually for deterrency. Deterrency from an imagined threat. China has no interest in invading us. Absolutely not. And anyone fear-mongering about that is just playing you. They're just a joke. They're trying to fear-monger the public, okay? China is our biggest trading partner. And interestingly, in this defense capability plan, they don't actually mention trade with China. They don't mention that as being an issue.
Oh, that's interesting.
And yet China is framed as the biggest strategic threat in the Indo-Pacific in this discussion.
It speaks to like just, you know, and it's like we've changed our language in terms of the IDF, right? The Israeli Defense Force. We now call them the IOF, right? The Israeli Offensive Force. And it just speaks to how it's crazy to call these things defense plans.
Yes.
We've upped defense spending.
What are you defending against?
And it's like, oh, are we defending against, I don't know, environmental, like extreme weather events? Are we defending against flooding? It gives that vibe,
Yes.
if someone had just heard that off the cuff, oh, we're increasing defense spending. Or maybe they're thinking about, oh, humanitarian capacity and humanitarian aid
Yes.
to go to, one of the genocides that's currently taking place overseas. It gives that kind of, the word defense. It's just such a, it's a con.
Yes, exactly. And, you raise an interesting point there because nothing in this defense capability plan actually even mentions climate change, which has been a really strong focus, especially for the Labour Party when it comes to their narrative around military spending. They have singled out climate change and defending climate change as one of the lead factors. But this document has been really quite honest, I have to say. They didn't bring up this false narrative about doing this to protect climate change. They clearly specified this is for a deterrent effect for this imagined threat of China that is actually, in fact, just a threat from the United States. This article from Newsroom is really good. It covers a lot of bases. It's not exactly against the plan, but a few really important things that this writer, who's this writer? Sam Sachdeva points out a couple of interesting things in this article. So one thing that they said in this is Dr. Peter Greener, Senior Fellow at Victoria University of Wellington Centre for Strategic Studies and former Academic Dean at New Zealand Defence Force. So that's interesting. He was a former Academic Dean at the New Zealand Defence Force's Command and Staff College. And now he's a Senior Fellow at Victoria University of Wellington. So you can see that revolving door between military and universities operating in real time, right? And what he says next is very telling. He told Newsroom that he and other colleagues had been pushing for greater consideration of autonomous and remotely piloted systems for some time, a cause given greater credibility from the experiences of the war in Ukraine. So he and other academics have been lobbying the government to put more funding into a specific type of weaponry. He says this has gained greater credibility from the experiences of Ukraine. And I find that fascinating because one of you folks watching commented on this episode today on Facebook and said that what happened in Ukraine was actually like a weapons expo for the entire world, like an advertisement for weapons for people like New Zealand to go and look, oh, man, that weapon seemed to work well against Russia. We're going to buy that. And I thought that was an interesting comment. And this article validates that comment because look at what this person says. It's significant that they were able to inflict the amount of damage on the Russian fleet as they did, including sinking a flagship, which was no mean feat without having a navy, Greener said. So they're watching the weapons in Ukraine. They're watching for how well they're doing against Russia, and they're thinking about whether they want to spend money on that. And so there is actually a real point to that comment about Ukraine operating like a weapons expo. It's horrific that that's the case, by the way. It's the same thing in Palestine. They test weapons on real people that cause real people's deaths and suffering to see the effectiveness of them for Western countries to then purchase, like New Zealand. So another interesting thing from this article, one other interesting thing.
Oh, can as well just address this comment from Dante. So Dante says, I think we need to enhance our military capabilities, but for an entirely different purpose. The only way we can truly be a sovereign state is if we can stand up to the genocidal US. It's like, well, if we up our military capabilities, where are we going to buy those military capabilities from? you know? We're going to buy them
all
from...
roads lead back to the US genocidal state.
And if we try and fight fire with fire, you know, this is the... I don't truly believe it can be done. I mean, look at how effective Hamas has been in fighting off the Israeli forces that have been invading, the ground forces that have been invading Gaza. They've been incredible. But there's nothing that they can do against these drones and things like that. I think once you step out of line from the colonizer's perspective, the whole international rules-based coalition is going to come down on us. So, you know, I reflect on the fact that New Zealand has a very strong nuclear-free stance. And I think, you know, we should extend that into other things. Like we should have a drone-free stance here in Aotearoa. We could be world leaders in really putting our foot down. We've all seen how incredibly destructive drones have been. No matter what genocide or war that you're watching at the moment, we're seeing the havoc that drones can cause. And I do think there is a place for us here in Aotearoa. We have, you know, although we have a bloody history of colonization and other things like that, you know, relatively speaking, we have made some good moves to signal to the rest of the world that we are a country of peace. And I think we've failed in many respects in that regard, but, you know, because
here and there,
there is a chance. And so seeing this route of upping our military spend, it makes no sense to me. And, you know, there's a comparison that I'm looking forward to us doing, but I won't jump ahead.
Kapai, yeah. It's the one, yeah. This is the one, yeah. So you're absolutely right. It's not just that we don't have the capability to respond to the United States, the biggest empire on the planet, but we also wouldn't be able to defend ourselves against China if China decided to attack us. Good thing they don't plan to bloody attack us. The only way that we would be involved with a war with China is if the United States instigated a war with China and we took the side of the United States and fought against them. That is the only way we would end up in a war with China. And so this whole narrative about we need to spend this money to deter against China is bullshit. We need to spend this money to prepare for the US's war on China. That's what they're trying to say. We need a background.
Yeah.
I know.
Bro, we need a lot of stuff.
We need a lot.
We need a lot of stuff. The background is not up there
wallpaper?
on the
colour?
priorities. Yeah, so these are the unpainted walls of our whare, by the way. Put your vote in the description what color we should.
I'm thinking dark green, but that's just boring. I'm always going for dark green everything.
I like it. I actually like it. Anyway, tangents.
Kapai. So another interesting in the article, and this was something that Labour pointed out as well, which was the government's plan is actually really similar to Labour's plan that was produced in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
So again, Hipkins came out and said the same thing. But what this writer very, very correctly points out is that the most striking difference between Labour's plan in 2019 and this plan now comes down to tone. The last government, quoting from this article, framed its proposed defence investments as a necessity for community and environmental well-being, with a chapter dedicated to climate crisis. This was a reflection of what was happening in New Zealand at the time, but there is no such reticence in the 2025 plan, which includes an emphasis on enhanced lethality.
There's that word.
An investment in enhanced strike capabilities through new missile systems.
They should just say that, killing capabilities.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We need to up our murder capabilities. Just all of these euphemisms, you know?
It's funny because on 3 News they did explicitly say, which means killing capabilities, but then they spent the entire next of the segment celebrating this new move. Not presenting any alternative narratives. And this is my biggest issue when it comes to this announcement about funding, is that on the media, everywhere you listen to, they are keeping the conversation so narrow that you're not hearing any voices on the media that are just outright against military spending, that want zero military spending. They want to abolish the military. Like, when it comes to me, I want to abolish the military. We need people to help with disasters. Awesome, amazing. Start a new disaster relief kaupapa. Start a new organization that is intensely hyper-focused on disaster relief and other emergencies in the country. They're so well trained. They're not trained on bombing people. They know nothing about using these tanks and drones to murder people in Yemen. They know only about disaster relief and helping people in earthquakes and tsunamis and other climate change issues. I'm keen for that. You can spend money on that. I would support that. But what they've been doing is using the general population support for disaster relief, for emergency support services, and funneling that energy into support to the military. And now they've just completely given up the guys altogether, and they're just straight up like, we're just going ahead because they've already manufactured enough support. They've already done the false arguments about climate change and so forth.
And also, it's like, we see a lot of stuff about Gaza and Israel in the media, but it's never in a very helpful way, right? The type of media coverage. But I'm sure it's enough to get those people who are listening, on the peripheral, for them to be anxious about the world and what's going on. And of course, everything is so volatile at the moment. So of course we have to be able to defend ourselves.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
That's a good point. And they tried to tap into that energy in that document about defense capability, that very silly little document they released. They said New Zealand is facing its most challenging and dangerous strategic environment for decades. Recent geopolitical developments demonstrate the increasing and compounding nature of threats to our national security interests. These include Russia's continuing illegal war against Ukraine and blatant disregard of international law. Look, very clear language. They know that Russia is the one breaching the law. But then the next line, ongoing tensions in the Middle East. Bruh, who is breaching international law? Who's illegally invading and occupying and imposing apartheid and who?
Oh, right. Just ongoing tensions.
After very clear language about Russia.
Right.
And then the next line, and growing strategic competition in the wider Indo-Pacific, which they make clear in the next lines that it's about China. But you're right, they chuck in
just to add to the anxiety, but not actually putting any blame on there so that they can play nice with the USA.
Absolutely. But just generally tapping into this energy of, there's issues in the Middle East. This means we have to spend money. Like, they're the ones that supported the genocide on Palestinians. It's your mates that are causing these tensions. It's your mates that are killing these people. And New Zealand's actually supported the war on Yemen, who was trying to do something to stop the genocide. So it's hilarious that they would bring that up as an example of how they might impact us when we're supporting the aggressors in that example. But yeah, you're right. They do just generally try and tap into any anxiety around war. Any anxiety around war to say, we need this, we need this, we need to defend this. We can't prosper as a country without this, right? So yes, back to this newsroom article. They point out the fact that they've changed the tone and now it's all about lethality, right? I think like this really interesting interview with Chris Hipkins. It shows how he is navigating that pivot from talking about the defense spending and justifying it in terms of climate change and disaster relief and so on, to now being explicitly about lethality. You can see him navigating that in this interview where he says an increase in defense spending is justified regardless of whether New Zealanders support it or not. He's quoted to have said this in this interview in numerous places. What's interesting though is listening to this interview, that specific quote, which again, I've seen it elsewhere with actual quotation marks, is no longer in this interview. I've emailed RNZ. I'm asking why that is. At the moment, I don't know why, but apparently in this interview, he said it's justified regardless of what New Zealanders think of it. Anyway, He said elsewhere that
That's interesting.
He supports this.
So I
But
think
what
there
I
is a
do find
recognition.
interesting in this interview is this part where he gets asked about whether it is simply about climate change or if it is more about the lethality and warmongering aspects, and see how Hipkins respond. We'll talk about it after.
A more volatile world, and people can see that.
The question
I
is
think the
coming soon.
discussion around increased defence spending, though, is a nuanced one, and I think the feedback that you've just read out highlights that. So if you think about the sort of capability that we need in our defence force, I think there is a recognition by New Zealanders that we need to have good ability to participate in disaster response and recovery, providing aid in the Pacific, particularly in the case of natural disasters, and that, you know, the Defence Force sort of would struggle to cope with multiple events. So if there'd been a similar event in the Pacific, for example, at the same time as we were dealing with Cyclone Gabrielle here in New Zealand, then I think our Defence Force would have struggled to be able to deliver the sort of thing that we would ask of them in those circumstances, and we need to take that seriously.
So are you thinking more along the lines of that recovery rather than actually defending ourselves from an attack?
Well, I think you obviously need to consider a range of factors, including the fact that New Zealand, in the event of global conflict, would need to do more to defend itself. And I think we do need to factor that in. We also need.
So you see, he started off his normal reply with, it's about climate change, it's about...
Get your foot in the door.
Yeah, and it's just that normal narrative that Labour has run with of why they need to increase military spending on the same things, by the way.
Isn't it interesting?
Labour wanted to spend it on the same things, just to be clear.
It's just interesting how we're seeing the Labour Party agree with a lot of things that National is saying. Every few days there seems to be another article of Labour agreeing with something National has done. Doesn't seem like what a normal opposition party would do. The amount of alignment, you know, this is one of those things, right? The military. And this is a huge kaupapa.
Alignment.
Huge kaupapa. We spend more on defense spending than
a lot of other
everything
things.
else.
Not everything. We spend
What's
a lot on.
We've only
but a lot on more. We spend more on defense. I looked it up today than we do on the disabled community per year in the country. Just for example. But carry on.
Have we made it to our other comparison? Or
Um,
am I jumping ahead again?
No, you have. I was gonna point out that not only
Go on then.
not only were the Labour's response weak, but the PSA, who, you know, is someone I'm usually defending. I'm defending against
They
the
do
likes
good,
of
Mahi?
the taxpayers union, so on and so forth, and the government. Because, by the way, I found out through this through the press conference with the government, and one of the reporters brought up, look, the PSA said, how can you do this when at the same time you're literally cutting civilian workforce from our defense forces? So if you're cutting the number of people, they're not even going to be able to implement it. This question was put to the government. Luxon and Collins literally laughed it off. They were like, ha. We don't listen to the PSA. They're nothing to us. They laughed them off and just used that fallacious argument, attacking them for who they are as opposed to their argument, right? So I went to look at the PSA statement, and the PSA statement is government must reverse cuts if it wants the defense spend to be effective. So they're not taking any ideological position against the defense spend. They're just saying if you want it to be effective,
if you want it to be lethal,
if you want the lethality to be truly lethal, you've got to have a bigger workforce. Now, I take problem with that narrative. I take problem with just agreeing with the general presupposition. I'm not even going to try. That we should be spending more on weapons of war, that we need greater lethality, that we have to be more effective in fighting off potential threats. I just don't buy into that at all. And you can see in this PSA press release, that's exactly what they're saying. They're supporting the overall idea of funding the military.
Sorry to interrupt. Just want to just give a mihi to the PSA and say, I don't know, like, do they often make those values-based statements? Like, what is good mahi in the eyes of the PSA? I don't, like, for them, they're just like, there are jobs here. We like jobs.
Yeah.
So
For them, it's their job. I thought about this. It's their job to come out and defend the public service because they're the Public Service Association, right? And so it's their job to defend those jobs within the military, like within the Defence Force, because it's a public service job, okay? I understand that, but they could have said, we are strongly against you cutting jobs within the space because we stand up for our workers in the Defence Force. But we also think that before you spend $1 on an American weapon or a weapon of war from anywhere, that you'd rather spend the dollar on other public service staff. Because remember, public service staff in Parliament are currently being cut, their wages being cut from living wage to below living wage. That's something that the PSA has spoken very strongly about. There are countless examples of how the government is cutting from public services, from cutting from public service employees and their ability to provide a living for their family around the country that they could have brought up and highlighted as being priorities before this military spending. But they only brought up those jobs in the Defence Force and otherwise validated the idea of spending money in this space. And Labour is the same, and you see unions often have the same opinion as Labour. And in this case, they agree that spending on military is fine. They just think that they should be treating the workers a little bit better. I cannot vibe with that. I cannot vibe with that, and it highlights the way that we are not necessarily aligned with Labour and unions when it comes to these big questions. Should we have a military force that's capable of causing lethal damage? Do we even need that in New Zealand? I mean, these are the underlying questions I think we should be asking. Kapai, we're finally up to the example that you...
Oh, kapai. So just the comparison, you know, we often hear about the Māori or the treaty, the Waitangi gravy train, right? The treaty grievance industry, right? So to this date, all money that has been spent on treaty settlements amounts to $2.7 billion. All money on treaty settlements, $2.7 billion. So currently, our current military spend, they say, is 1% of GDP, and we're doubling it to just over 2% of GDP. We're increasing it by 12 billion, right? So if we're doubling it, we're spending about 12 billion currently. Over the course of 4 years, I think is my understanding. If we're doubling it,
so 3 billion a year,
right?
So each
That's
year,
the rough calculation.
They're wanting to spend more on defense than they have spent all together on this apparently scary big gravy train that everyone's been going on about.
It's outrageous. So every year we're spending more on our military than the entirety of all money that has gone into these to address the breaches, the Crown's breaches of Te Tiriti o Waitangi.
To address the Crown-inflicted genocide of Māori.
Killed it.
To address the Crown stealing the vast majority of land from Māori and subjecting them to enslavement under the colonial system every year, less than what they want to spend on the military.
And so for me, this is a big example of how National and Labour align on the big kaupapas. Māori sovereignty, they're aligned. Even though Chris Hipkins has said that he believes Māori didn't cede sovereignty through signing Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And Willie Jackson made note to remind everyone that Chris Hipkins has made that declaration because it is significant to say that. But we don't see it translate into what Labour could do with their political power, like the massive majority that they had in their previous term. They could have done all sorts of things. They could have enshrined Te Tiriti o Waitangi into our constitution. They could have enshrined what they were doing with Te Aka Whai Ora, all of these things that are now being rolled back, right? They could have ensured that wasn't possible. Totally. And so even though we have these surface level statements coming out from Hipkins around Māori not ceding sovereignty, we're not seeing it translated into actually honouring te tiriti o Waitangi, kind of like the principles. It's just another kind of surface level thing that doesn't actually translate into actually honouring te tiriti. So on the military, on Māori sovereignty, our major parties really are, cut from the same colonial cloth, right? And, people often call Labour a party on the left. And I think it's unfair for us to apply our understanding of what is left and what is right without looking at our local context. Relatively speaking, here in Aotearoa, who is actually on the left? Too often do we look at our Labour Party and compare it to the Labour Party of the UK or Labour Party of anywhere else in the world. And there is this general understanding that globally these parties sit on the left. But on these big issues of Indigenous rights, of military spending, and other things, we start to see their alignments. And this is why we need to look outside of the two-party binary, the two establishment party binary, and looking to our minor parties, hopefully not on the right of that spectrum, but looking to our minor parties to pull the center, and they really are center right or center, at best, to pull that center more to the left. That's what we need to do. If we're not pulling them further along that spectrum, then we're just going to see more of the same. And people often say like, oh, they are so different. They're so different. They really are different. But on the big kaupapa, that would actually have a lot of impact here in Aotearoa, that's where we see a lot of alignment.
Yes, exactly. Like the way that Labour potentially spent 10 billion extra on wage subsidy, 10 billion unnecessarily on businesses and wealthy people who didn't need it. They did it, and they wore the political risk. They were fine to wear that and to just, whoopsies, no, we're not going to give that money back after they got pushed for it, and they just moved on, right? Why are they not able to just make a big grand gesture like that? To just say, well, you know what, we're giving 10 billion to Māori to help them live up to the aspirations promised to them in Te Tiriti o Waitangi. How come National can come out randomly and be like 12 billion to military because imaginary war with China and just wear the political risk, but Labour can't come out and say we're giving 12 billion to Māori? Whatever you can do about it, cry about it. I don't give a shit. I might lose an election? Let me lose an election. They lost the last election anyway. Why not give 12 billion to Māori that cannot be returned? An immediate check. Nothing. No strings attached. 12 billion to Māori entities to exercise self-determination. Labour could have done that in the way that National's doing that for defence. They could have done that in the way that did that during COVID when they passed that money on to rich people. And yes, and I know there's a little bit of an argument going on in the chat.
Oh, is there?
Oh, minor.
Oblivious.
Someone saying about the vaxxers, like, there is a valid point to make about money going to private corporations during the whole COVID crisis.
Absolutely.
And I think what happened during that time is that legitimate questions of corruption and legitimate questions of companies like Johnson's & Johnson's and Pfizer, which has been known for criminal cases in their histories, just like Compass Group, just renowned for being corrupt and causing harm to communities, being given these massive contracts, rich people being given these billions of dollars, and no questions being allowed to ask, because we weren't able to have those conversations, because we weren't able to have those questions, those conversations ended up being siloed in the worst, darkest corners of our internet, where it turned into conspiracy theories, where it turned into misinformation. But there is actually grains of truth in them. And I myself was against the COVID mandates. Not because of any conspiracy theories. I had my own reasons that I didn't want to take the vaccines, and it was because of animal testing reasons. Nothing to do with what you heard, you know, the propaganda about anti-vaxxers, blah, blah, blah. Nothing like that. I just didn't want to take the vaccine because it was tested on animals. And yeah, I still took the first vaccine because I felt like I was forced at the time because of the mahi that we were doing. We couldn't go into theatres to play Pere's documentary Milked if we hadn't received the vaccine. And so I did eventually take the first vaccine, but I didn't want to because of the animal testing issues. And other people in my life were forced to take the vaccine because of their jobs. And they cried about it. They were deeply, deeply hurt about it. They didn't want to take it. I didn't feel right that they had to take it to keep their jobs. For me, that was the line. You losing your job for not getting a medical, an injection, for you not getting a vaccine, for me, that crossed an ethical line. That's what I feel about it. And we should have been able to have healthy conversations about it and debate it. You know, me and someone who was for the mandates, because I know a lot of people who follow the stream supported the mandates, for example. A lot of my friends supported the mandates, but a lot of my friends didn't. I wanted to be able to have healthy conversations about this. We weren't able to. And that's why we've now ended up in this place where you have people who are seen as like anti-vax people, and we can't even like hear from them. They're siloed, you know? And I just don't want that to happen on our streams, folks, because I know that misinformation is a big thing in this space. I know that there is a problem with needing to make information in this space honest and clear, and you know that we will always try our best to only speak to facts, but we do have to resist the otherizing of our communities that occurred during that time, which I believe created so much division in our communities that actually created the in for the right-wingers to come in and capture all of those votes, even though they don't represent the values that those people are worried about. They don't represent the issues that they care about, but they pretended to, and they were able to pick up all of those votes and pick up all of those people. And I just think we need to do a better job on the left of bringing those people in, having those conversations honestly, even if we do disagree, and just like being okay with disagreeing. What do you think, Pere?
Oh, just that, you know, I was just reflecting on potent perspective with another potent perspective here. That Labour did a shit job at explaining things. And I think, you know, yeah, I think they did, because, you know, there were so many aspects about what happened during that period that were rushed. But anyway, I was just thinking about how Jacinda said, you know, we will continue to be your single source of truth, right? This is a quote that she said. I think we've got it in our intro. I don't know. I can't remember. But, you know, Jacinda came on TV and said, we will continue to be your single source of truth. And, you know, for a colonial government, for a government that is continually breaching Te Tiriti o Waitangi, you know, even during Labour's time, you know, people need to remember it was the Labour Party that created Te Pāti Māori. They don't have that luxury of being able to make a claim like that, of being able to say something like that. We will be your single source of truth. Already, and I could just I don't have to lump any groups into this. I can just speak about myself. I don't trust the government. And I believe I have good reason to not trust the government. And we all know that, you know, glyphosate's in our food, you know, cancer from our red meat, and, you know, we've all got lactose intolerance from dairy products, and all of these weird foreign things that we're putting into our bodies. Why would we trust the government on an untested vaccine and then force people to lose their jobs because they don't want to take that?
Yes.
And just given that whakapapa of distrust towards the government, to say things like that, to just erase everything that's happened in the past and pretend that everything is hunky-dory and that we should all just 100% trust whatever the government has to say, yeah, it's wild.
And that if you didn't, you were inherently evil and a bad person.
That you're, you know, in a different subsection of society, and that you should have different rights. I think there is a great argument for a lot of people, especially what Jen is saying in the
Yes,
comments.
and masking can often be better than vaccinations, and a lot of studies have shown that. Because vaccinations don't prevent transmission. And Leah also pointed this out, that a lot of disabled people can't participate in society because of the lack of cautions taken for COVID, because it's absolutely true. Like, the issues of COVID never ended. And for me, this even highlights the deceptiveness of it all, is that overnight the media just stopped talking about COVID. It's not that the harms of COVID ended overnight.
Yeah.
But they just decided it was no longer politically beneficial to them, which again highlights the way that they utilized this crisis to push whatever agenda they were pushing. It wasn't about caring for people. Because if it was about caring for people, there are a lot of things that we would be doing, changing our society to be cautious of the harms of COVID. And that includes greater masking, ventilation in classrooms, so many things that we know and data has proven would help. They're not interested in spending money on that. What they were interested in is dividing our societies, this is my belief anyway, creating weaknesses in our movements. It divided so many of our movements, and then inserting in those cracks and using them to push a right-wing agenda. And they've been so successful at that, so incredibly successful at that. But yeah, I just want to add, like, thank you to Jen and other people who have spoken about their personal experiences of loss with COVID, and I don't ever want to minimize from that. So kia ora to everyone giving voice to that in the chat as well.
Yeah, and just good on everyone. I'm seeing some respectful kōrero, so I'm not keeping up totally with the comments, but it's good to see respectful kōrero, and hopefully we can maintain that kind of energy with this stream, and it can be a space where we explore nuanced opinions in some of the grey spaces that often can't be talked about. And in the future, once we have everything solid and know exactly what we're doing, we do plan on bringing people on for interviews, so we can actually have a much more diverse set of opinions rather than it just being me and Samah and our comment section. So just, mihi atu kia koutou for the respectful kōrero. Very good.
Yeah, kia ora tātou. Yeah, I'm loving all the amazingly mature and wise comments, and love the people who come to these streams, honestly.
Ka pai. Okay, final kaupapa for the night. We're gonna cover the special rights argument that you always hear from the ACT Party and just, that whole cohort of people. It's one of those funny things, because we don't want to talk about rights. This is their framing of the discussion. And it's the same with things like co-governance. When co-governance came around, we didn't want to talk about co-governance. We want to talk about tino rangatiratanga. We want to talk about Māori sovereignty. We want to talk about the fact that Māori never ceded sovereignty, and therefore, what is the Crown's justification for imposing all of these, bits of legislation, laws, and all of these various things? What is the foundation for you to do that? That is what the conversation is meant to be about. And so we've been reluctant to address some of the things that the ACT Party talks about, because their whole kaupapa is about shifting our focus. That's my desktop background. We are meant to be talking about Māori sovereignty, but instead it's been subverted. And sometimes we see the Greens, raise it in the House to bring the kōrero back. Do you think that Māori ceded sovereignty? And Luxon usually says yes. But that is what the conversation is meant to be about. It's meant to be about Māori sovereignty. And particularly, this is where the debate has usually been, is around Article 2 of Te Tiriti. What tino rangatiratanga means. For me, it means Māori sovereignty, Māori self-determination, Māori independence. And that has been where the debate or the contention has been around. What does tino rangatiratanga look like? But instead, it's come to us talking about, and this is how they frame it, Māori asking for different rights within the colonial system. Different rights within the colonial system. And that completely ignores Article 2 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi talking about tino rangatiratanga. Tino rangatiratanga is it's the Māori, it should be perceived as this, the Māori form of self-governance. And so what we're asking is for our tino rangatiratanga, our right to self-determination, to be acknowledged. Not that we want you to give us something extra in your system. We want you to get out of the way so that we can operate in our systems that we were operating under before you came and enforced your self-proclaimed sovereignty over us. And we hear it from David Seymour. He's even said, oh, I've heard some of the treaty submissions, but I didn't hear any good arguments. And he's all like, you know, this is how he tries to frame it. He says, show me a place in society where two different sets of rights for people based on their ethnicity is a good idea. Why don't you answer that? Why don't you give me a reason for that? And it's like, bruh, that's not the conversation that we've been trying to have. This crazy guy, trying to be careful with my words, this crazy man has just inserted himself into this debate that's been going on for a very long time. This very intense, very fiery, very divisive at times debate around Māori sovereignty and how we actualize, you know, honoring Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And he's just decided to jump in and throw a grenade into the mix and then demand and dictate that we argue back to him through his framing of the situation, which is just, absolutely wild. But just to give some more context, and then we'll talk about it a little bit more, I'm going to play this interview with Eru Kapakingi, who's the spokesperson for Toitu Te Tiriti, an interview that he had with Jack Tame on Q&A, and just listen to how Jack talks about this.
Talk to us a bit more about this Hawaii Ho concept. So at the heart of your political activism, if we can call it that, is a vision for a totally different Aotearoa. I'll start with some really basic questions. Should all New Zealanders have the same rights?
Yes.
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 Do you think that many of the things the ACT Party, for example, has rallied against, or do you think policy settings in New Zealand, on occasion, allow different rights on the basis of ethnicity?
Yeah, so to go back to your question on...
So the first question from Jack is, should everyone have equal rights? Should everyone have equal rights? And we say yes. He then goes on to say, what about some of these things that the ACT Party is talking about? Well, first off, he's talking about equal rights, okay, everyone having equal rights. And then let's just hear how he says that second part, so I got it right.
That many of the things the ACT Party, for example, has rallied against, or do you think policy settings in New Zealand, on occasion, allow different rights on the basis of ethnicity?
And so he's essentially referencing Māori sovereignty or tino rangatiratanga, or what we're trying to advocate for, and framing it as, how would you word this one? He's saying, do you want equal rights?
From the get-go.
And then I think I've got it. He's saying, do we want equal rights? Yes. And then he's saying, oh, but some of these things that the ACT Party have been talking about means that what you're advocating for is not equal rights.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's a tricky one because it's kind of like, where do you start? But we're being forced to accept the crumbs, right? The thing that National and Labour are aligned on. They don't want to properly honour Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And because they don't want to properly honour Te Tiriti o Waitangi, we're getting all of these little bits of crumbs, the Waitangi Tribunal, the treaty principles, treaty settlements, which on average returns less than 1% of what has actually been taken away from us. So there's all of these various crumbs that we didn't ask for, these returns in the various ways that the government is, drip feeding us. We're being forced to fight for those things and to defend those things, like the principles. And some things that can be perceived as race-based policies, those are broken halfway measures that have been created by the Crown to appease Māori. And it's funny, this is kind of like where the ACT Party and probably myself and some people agree. We're both criticizing the Crown in terms of how this is all manifested.
Yeah.
But the ACT Party, like New Zealand First, are not saying, oh yeah, get rid of Māori wards and Te Ako Whaiora and everything like that. Get rid of that and replace it with actually honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi. They're not saying that. They're just saying get rid of those things and let's just completely reframe what Te Tiriti says. Like when they talk about Te Tiriti, they don't say what it says. They just say this is what it should say. Just completely trying to transform and morph Te Tiriti instead of what it is to what they say it should mean. But, so we're stuck in this space of having to defend these broken halfway measures. And it's a shame because it's not the conversation that we should be having. We shouldn't be having this conversation about whether or not the crumbs that we're receiving are justifiable. We need to be having a conversation about how there is a completely different authority that exists outside of the Crown, and it is that system that we want to operate. If we get better outcomes through that system, because the colonial system is inherently oppressive and sucks for all of us, like how in Kura Kaupapa, on average, Māori students are performing better in Kura Kaupapa, a Māori-based education system, compared to public schools. If that is the kind of outcome that we have in, a Māori society where we're running by our own customs and tikanga, if we get better outcomes in our system, and, those are the kinds of things that we're advocating for, then...
No, you can't leave us to suffer in this colonial system. You have to suffer with us. You must suffer and die together
that's what
under
it
the
seems.
colonial system.
That's what it feels like, eh?
And so the sleight of hand of Jack Tame's questioning, and indeed this entire argument from the current government. Do you believe that everyone in New Zealand should have equal rights? Is that how his question basically started?
Yep.
There's an unstated assumption going on here. And it's the biggest assumption of all, and it's effectively the thing that we are arguing against in the first place. When he says, do you believe everyone in New Zealand should have equal rights? He's saying, do you believe everyone in New Zealand should have equal rights under colonial law? The answer to that question is yes. Under colonial law, Article 3 is very clear. Everyone under the Crown's law should have equal rights. That's what Article 3 says. The Queen's laws, that's the current laws that we are currently all living under, they should have equal rights for everyone. Clear as day. The answer is yes. But the thing that they're missing is Article 2, which says that Māori should have tino rangatiratanga, which is outside of the colonial laws. And so when Jack Tame asks, should Māori have the same laws as everyone else under the current system, the answer is yes, but he's neglecting to even touch on the argument of Māori having their own legal system which sets its own set of rights outside of the colonial system. But because he traps us in that very first question of do you believe everyone should have equal rights, every question from that continues within that framework that the colonizer is the one that sets the laws and the rights in this country. Once you concede to that, then the next question comes from Jack Tame, which is, well, the ACT Party has pointed out that within the colonial laws, there are laws, as you called them, halfway measures, that are based on ethnicity. Jack Tame points at those and says those are different to other people's rights under colonial law. And so therefore the conclusion that the ACT Party reaches, which is that we should abolish all laws under the colonial system that has to do with Māori, because they're not equal, they're different, as Jack Tame then goes on to say. But in that conversation, they've completely avoided the argument altogether, which is that Māori are asking for their right of self-determination, to have tino rangatiratanga outside of the colonial sphere. You know, we talk about this like every episode, that we live under a colonial dome. And what Jack Tame and the ACT Party and everyone else is doing is saying, within that colonial dome, should we all have equal rights? When in fact, the discussion is about Māori existing outside of that colonial dome. They're out here. Woo! Decolonization is everything outside of this dome. It's that whole entire world outside of this dome. And so what I believe they're doing with this argument is colonizing our thought processes and narrowing them down to be within the realms of the colonial world. So not only can we not, or as they hope, as they try their best to stop us from living out tino rangatiratanga, from living out expressions of Māori self-determination. They're also trying to stop us from mentally going there or thinking about Māori living outside of the colonial system. And so they bring the argument back to, oh, Māori want different laws within the colonial system. That's the fallacy right there. Māori are not asking to have the same law, different laws within the colonial system, although they might be stepping stones, as you said. They're asking to be outside of the colonial system altogether. But the question of should Māori have equal rights is presupposing that only the Crown sets the rights for this country. Only the Crown is able and privileged enough to be able to set the rights for this country. And so you see that reversal of reality. Currently, the Crown is the only one exercising that privilege. They're acting like they have a special right to govern everyone in the country, including Māori. When in reality, Māori have the right to tino rangatiratanga and the ability to self-determine their own laws and regulations outside of the colonial system. So that's the sleight of hand that they do when it comes to the special rights argument. Do Māori want special rights within the colonial system? No, 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 no. Māori want the ability to have their own self-governing system. That conversation is completely missing from the narrative. And I think they do that deliberately to stop us from imagining anything outside of the colonial world.
They have to confine us to the thinking that that must exist within the dome. And so, like, you know, when the ACT Party, originally they said their second principle, you know, which is talking about the second article of Te Tiriti, their second principle was about giving tino rangatiratanga to all New Zealanders, which is like an oxymoron. You know, it's an oxymoron. You can't have tino rangatiratanga, which is like, you know, unfettered, undisturbed, chiefly authority. You know, you can't have that ultimate sovereign power under another system. It's just a complete, you know, and it runs along the idea that many people have tried to spread, that Article 2 is just about property rights and that, you know, everyone should have property rights. But that is not at all what Article 2 and what tino rangatiratanga is about. Tino rangatiratanga in Article 2 was referring to our lands, you know. How do you have complete undisturbed authority over lands without being sovereign, you know, without being the utmost authority? It goes further than just being like, oh, I've got a contract that has my name which says, I am the rightful owner of the deed of this piece of land, goes well beyond that. And not only that, but, what was said during the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi by missionaries to Māori back in the day, we're an oral language culture. What was said during the signing of Te Tiriti o Waitangi held just as much weight as the very words that were written into Te Tiriti o Waitangi. What the missionaries, what Hobson and what many others were telling Māori at the time was that Te Tiriti o Waitangi would protect their chiefly rights to operate under their own determination. That was what Te Tiriti o Waitangi was meant to bring. But instead, there's been this great big movement to try and say, or to try and redefine tino rangatiratanga. And true tino rangatiratanga cannot exist with another authority over the top of it, like a crown authority. That's why a lot of people say that Te Pāti Māori shouldn't be pursuing aspects of tino rangatiratanga under a crown structure like our central government. Like some people say, it just kind of doesn't make any sense. I think it's a great place for them to raise important discussions. When you're in Parliament, your kōrero gets amplified. So I think it's a perfect place for them to be, to raise important discussions, such as this, instead of us being corralled into all of ACT's talking points about special rights under the colonial system.
Yes. And unfortunately, we're having to protect the little crumbs that the colonial system have given us, because Māori are being so deeply oppressed by the current colonial system. The problem with this government is that they're not even admitting that the current colonial system has this systematically disenfranchises Māori. Like you have Mark Mitchell, the Minister for Police and mercenary, who likely killed Iraqi people when he participated in that war on our people. He explicitly denies that there is systemic bias within the police, which is, by the way, the most watered down version of saying that there is racist violence within the police force. He just outright denies it. And so what we end up with is the government that wants to remove even whatever the tiniest little bits of barriers to the current colonial system, just having complete authority and control to oppress Māori as much as they like in this country. They want to remove whatever those limitations are and just allow the colony to oppress Māori as much as they want, to extract as much as they want from the land and so forth. But the issue is that no matter who's making the argument, whether it's Labour or National, we're still getting stuck within the confines of, this is a discussion of, should the colonizer give special rights and laws based on race within the colonial system, or should they not altogether? Neither of these parties are talking about Māori just having their own system of governance and laws and rights altogether. Because the true answer to Jack Tame's question is that yes, everyone has the same rights under the colonial system. And yes, Māori have tino rangatiratanga where they're able to set their own sets of laws and rights. And that currently only the Crown is exercising that special privilege to govern, to set laws, to set rights for the country.
It's just like this inability to accept the possibility of decolonization. The inability to accept that there could be an alternative system that exists outside of this colonial dome. They don't want us thinking about it. They have to restrict everything. They have to water everything down. They have to laugh at our ideas of these things, but thankfully we do have Te Tiriti o Waitangi. And although some people might not appreciate the gravity of the document, just think about how the New Zealand government literally has its authority to operate because of this written document. Legally, it would not exist without Te Tiriti o Waitangi. So there's so much legal precedence for us to lean into to actually hold the Crown to account. But maybe we should start wrapping up, but it just, the fear that has been drummed up in the public around tino rangatiratanga and Māori sovereignty, it reminds me of the defense spending, right? They're trying to get us on the scarcity mindset. They're trying to get us on this idea that we need to defend ourselves, that we need to really hold on to what we've got because it's a crazy world. People talking about, the Māori elite overtaking New Zealand, through the treaty grievance gravy train industry, when we see that actually we're spending more on defense every year than the entirety of treaty settlements for our entire lifetimes. Like, it's clear the groups that our government and the establishment chooses to demonize and chooses to focus on when there are actually more important, more legitimate things. Clearly they're distracting from something, and we can see that through the spread of money, through the things that they choose to talk about, and the things that they choose to demonize and push to the side.
Absolutely. They're asking us all to be afraid of a total of under 3 billion in treaty settlements. Meanwhile, on a day-by-day basis, they're handing out millions and billions of dollars to military contracts. Their billionaire friends that funded them into parliament, to fishing companies that funded Shane Jones, and so on and so forth. And all of that is normalized. The right wing has no issue with it. They're not talking about the capitalist gravy train. They're not talking about the colonial gravy train. They're hyper-focusing on something that, when you look at it objectively, is receiving so much less money, has no real power and influence in this country in the same way that the colony does, and yet it's the Māori elites that we're told to be afraid of. So it's just so clear, right? It's
painful.
The ACT Party is outwardly funded by the richest people in this country. They're outwardly defending the interests of the literal elites, and as they do that, they're trying to scapegoat it on the most oppressed people in this country, calling them the elites.
Tusk. Anyway, I think we're nearing the 9 p.m. We're always like, we're not going to do 3 hours this time. We're going to be nice and short and succinct. So thank you, everyone. Hopefully,
stop saying that.
Oh yeah, we should just stop. Let's do 4 hours next time. Thank you, everyone, for dropping by in this stream, whether you've been here just for a little while or if you've actually stayed during the whole time. Thank you so much.
Which is so cool.
If that is the case, before you go, please do hit that like button. And I hate saying this, but I feel like we just need to start saying it.
Like and subscribe.
And probably we need to respect our audience and grow as a channel, as I'm sure our audience would like us to. So do hit the like button. And if you appreciate our content, consider sharing the next stream before we go live. Leave comments. And thank you to everyone who has been leaving thoughtful comments. It
makes our night, to be honest, the comments.
And I think it makes the stream. If we didn't have the comment interaction, I think it just wouldn't be the same, and it wouldn't be worth it from our perspective in terms of the community that we're wanting to foster. So thank you, everyone. Mihi atu ki a koutou, and kia pai te pō. Have a good night. Have a good weekend. Enjoy the rest of your Friday evening, whatever you are doing. And just aroha nui. Kia koutou. Thank you all so much. I
was going to say that we are working on a membership system for Aotearoa Liberation League, a new mailing list, newsletter thing, because we can't rely on these social media platforms. Let's face it, it's only a matter of time before we get removed on things like Instagram, which is our biggest platform. So really keen to make a mailing list. Keen to create more of an intentional community around the people who do support Aotearoa Liberation League. And hopefully my ultimate aim is to start having meetings with breakout rooms where we can actually meet each other and talk with each other and feed into the knowledge that we have.
And free Aotearoa.
Right.